Yes, I'm so excited to be here with you all. And I'm also so excited that we get to take a break right at the peak of the eclipse so you could go out and not miss that really exciting opportunity. We had the full eclipse in the zone of totality here back in 2017. So I know what a thrill it is, and I'll get to see a little bit of it as well over here in Oregon. So welcome and thanks so much for being a part of this. And you give me a great joy. You're saying, it's an honor for me to be here, but you give me a great joy in being here and being able to share my passion for, making schools a safer, a more enjoyable place for students and for teachers. So, and educators, across the board. So yeah, with that, let's go ahead and get started. I do want to say the Padlet, there are a bunch of great resources on there. I'll reference some of them throughout. One tool in particular that we will come back to is the TIPS fidelity checklist. If you have a chance to print that out, that would be wonderful. If not, that's okay. You can kind of just look at the screen while we're going through that, but that will be a helpful tool to have as a close-up. It's just a one pager that you can go ahead and print out. Okay, so with that, and I noticed that someone did have their hand raised at one point, and I think if you do have a question, just stick to the Q&A at this point, and or if you were raising your hand just to say hi, thank you. All right, let's go ahead. I'm going to share my screen with you, and let's see here. Can you see a slide that says PBIS and MTSS are like mountain climbing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Erica. All right, so I know this presentation is within the context of implementing tiered systems of support and specifically behavior tiered systems of support. But one thing I like to keep in mind whenever we're thinking about learning new procedures, learning new processes, is that this is a long journey, right? So, and it really is like mountain climbing. I know here in Oregon, we've got some epic mountains, and you don't go up and traverse them lightly. It takes a long process to build up the skill, to build up the equipment, to build up the support team, to make sure that you can climb that mountain specifically. So that's what I've got here on the screen. Just extreme mountain climbing involves a willing and committed team with a shared vision driven by a common goal. It requires preparation for best and worst case scenarios and leadership that has a plan to make the best decisions for the team during those scenarios. Mountain climbing requires intentional planning for successful implementation. And that's really what I believe Patton has done has set a wonderful example across the country for us of being really thoughtful about long-term implementation of PBIS at the various tiers. It's a long-term journey, and I'm so excited to be here as a part of this tier 2 component and series that you all have been experiencing. So you'll see that there's a lot of tie-ins to the previous presentations that you all have seen in the series as well. So just a little bit about me. I really am a strong advocate of intentional implementation and this idea that it takes all hands on deck in order to have that happen successfully. I've been doing this work now. I'm at this point in my career where I'm like, oh my gosh, how long have I been doing this? So I've been doing this since 2006, working on tiered systems. And I should have you all know that I started actually in the reading world, and I was a reading interventionist. I have my master's in special education, so I was really focused on reading intervention and K-3 instruction. I taught special education reading and writing briefly for 3rd and 5th grade. And then I was a school psychologist and a school counselor as well. So I've held different hats along the years in my career. But always I've learned that it's so critical, and I've had just like amazing opportunities to travel the country and visit schools in from Alaska to most recently the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas Islands in the far Pacific, down, to the Southwest and to the East Coast. So I've really had an amazing career so far, been able to see what these tiered systems look like. And there's certainly commonalities across all of our schools, but there's really unique contextual features as well. So I'm here presenting to you today as an expert in tips and teaming, but I recognize that every 193 of you, I think right now, have amazing expertise as well. And I would encourage you to, share those when you're sharing that Q&A, say how it relates to your school and your context, and that'll help build all of our knowledge to improve our understanding and the application of the skills that we're talking about today. One of the great joys of my career just recently has been to be able to be a co-author on a book. So during the pandemic, that was one of the things I got to do, was to be a co-author on a textbook, Assessment in Special and Inclusive Education. And it's with one of my idols, Dr. Jim Eiseldike. He started this book back in the 70s with Dr. Salvia. So it used to be Salvia and Eiseldike. And now it's Eiseldike, Chaparro, and Vanderheiden. And we really gave it a major overhaul with the 2023 edition, and including on page 416 from Pennsylvania's own Drs. Tina Lawson and Shonda Talene. They wrote a section on us about effective teams through tips in Pennsylvania. So on your Padlet, there is a discount code. It's available for this week only. I just want to put that out there. I make a whopping $2 from every book. So, just so you know, full transparency. But the publisher doesn't give away a discount very often. It's, I think it's almost $25 off. And if you have the book shipped to you, it's free shipping and handling. So if you'd like that reference book on your shelf, I would say go ahead and take advantage of that. And maybe you can get Shonda or Tina to sign your book too. So anyway, okay. Well, thanks everyone for indulging me for that minute. Right now, I am at the University of Oregon as a research associate professor. I actually got my PhD and my master's there as well. I did leave for a while. And as I've said, I've been able to travel really the world at this point, sharing information about tips and the research that we do at the University of Oregon. One piece of the secret to our success, I think, of our work here in Oregon is that really, my awareness of the stages of implementation started, in about 2009. 2010, and I had the chance to go to a 3-day workshop with Dr. Dean Fixon at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and he really was spreading the news in education to think about implementation a little bit differently. And so as you are today learning about teaming and thinking about your tier 2 practices overall, if you've been attending this series, I want to encourage you to think about the skills that you all are developing and the interventions and the strategies that you're implementing within this lens of the stages of implementation. So it starts at exploration, where you're trying to figure out, in the context of tier 2, which interventions are right for our context. What needs do our students have? What needs do our teachers have? And so that's that exploration phase where you're really looking at the data, but you're trying to decide what gaps do we have, and actually also what interventions are we already implementing that maybe we should transition away from. So that's a part of that exploration process as well. The preparation phase is when you decided, okay, we are actually going to move forward with, for example, check in, check out for our tier 2 standard, one of our main interventions. Okay, so we're going to prepare to implement check in, check out. What do we need to do? What resources do we need to gather? Do we have personnel that are working on one intervention but need to switch over to another intervention because we're going to stop doing that one and start doing this one? So preparation takes time before you jump in to this initial implementation and say, okay, we're all in. Beginning of the school year, we've got our protocols, everyone's been trained, everyone knows what the routines are. And then that initial implementation phase can take 3 years, can take 4 years, can take 5 years until you're really an expert and you're building, you have many experts in your building and you're running at that full implementation phase with the ultimate goal of sustainability. And many of you in Pennsylvania are fortunately at that sustainability phase, certainly when it comes to tier 1 of PBIS. There's so many exemplars across your state. So that's something to think about. But then tier 2 is kind of still new. So maybe your school is in that preparation phase or in that initial implementation phase. And if you are a coach, or a building leader, you can think about where your school is maybe in full implementation for tier 1, but you might be in the preparation phase for tier 2. So that's just a helpful lens to look at. And just to carry out this mountain climbing analogy a little bit further, this is how I think about it. We do a lot of camping here in Oregon. We're known for that. So exploration is when you're just at home and you're planning for the trip. You're excited. You've got, you're getting your materials, you're making your lists, thinking about everything. But preparation is when you're actually like packing up the van, when you got to get the kids all in there, when you got to make sure everyone's got their lunches and their supplies and their warm socks and their warm sleeping bags. Initial implementation is, you can think about it when maybe you've only been camping a couple times, you're still just a summer camper or a car camper or a glamper even. But you're learning the skills, and you're slowly adding to your toolkit and feeling a little bit more expert every time. And then that that full implementation is like, you're an all-weather camper. You've got all the gear, all the best spots, with that ultimate level of being that mountain climbing, sustainability, expert camper level achieved. So I think this analogy really helps me to think about having patience with ourselves and with the system. And it takes a long time, but that there are great benefits. Okay, and I do see. Great. It looks like all the questions in the Q&A are being answered. Feel free to throw those questions in throughout. You don't have to wait till any specific time. So now I'm just going to, well, our minds are fresh at the beginning here. I am going to talk about research just a little bit. Oh, let's see here. There is someone having a challenge with a Padlet. So I'm sure someone will help you out with that. Thanks, Mariko, for letting us know that. You saw Sarah McDaniel, I saw, was one of your previous speakers, and she is one of the co-authors on this paper that I led with a really amazing team. But we were really curious in this question of, how do schools in rural settings differ in implementation of PBIS? Are there differences? And the Department of Education calls it locale. So are there differences in locale from a city setting to a rural setting, for example? So we looked at TFI data, tiered fidelity inventory data, from almost 11,000 schools across the country. And so you can see here on the screen here, I believe you can see my cursor. We've got the 4 different locales: are city, suburban, town, and rural. And as I've mentioned, this idea of full implementation and initial implementation. And in the research, most researchers are tending to think of initial implementation as the first 5 years of implementation of anything. But in our case, PBIS and PBIS at the different tiers. And then full implementation at that 6 or more years. So we split those two up. So you can see kind of the top bar here is 6 or more years. The bottom bar here is 5 or fewer years. And, you can see here there's 1,500 schools in the city group, 1,600 in the suburban, 572 in the town, and 1,045 in rural. And we have a lot of rural schools here in Oregon. I know you have a lot of rural schools in Pennsylvania, as well as some really notable city schools as well, and everything in between. So basically, though, what we found is that for those schools that were implementing for just 5 or fewer years, 73% implementation at the city for city schools for tier 1, and 73 for rural at tier 1. For those that were implementing 6 or more years, 81% for city schools, and actually 83%. So they were better in the rural schools. So really no differences in tier 1. Where we really started to see the differences was in tier 2 and tier 3 implementation. And that's what we're here to talk about today, that tier 2. So tier 2, the bars on the left are the lighter shaded bars there. Those are the full implementation, or the 6 or more years, and the darker bars on the right are the 5 or fewer years. This is all tier 2 implementation, and then it's urban on the left-hand side, to city, to town, to rural on the right. And you can see here that for the 6 or more years, the difference goes from 79% for urban schools down to 76% at schools, so at the rural schools. So only about 3% difference there, not a huge difference. But at the 5 or fewer years of implementing, we start with the urban schools at 65%, and then rural schools are down at the 59%. So a bigger difference there. So basically what this is telling us is that there's larger differences observed during those initial implementation years, and that it might actually be that schools in rural settings need more support in tier 2 in those earlier years of implementation. We saw the same thing when we looked at tier 3, and we're just going to look at the 5 or fewer years of implementing tier 3. So rural schools, we can see are 54%. They reached 54% on the TFI in the tier 3, and urban schools are reaching 60% within that first 5 years. So again, a 6% difference there. So thinking about what supports you're offering rural schools who might be a little bit more out of reach in those first 5 years is the point of this, to get us thinking about what more we can do. So when we look at only the rural schools, and we look at rural schools who are implementing for 6 or more years versus those 5 or fewer years, we can see that there's actually a really big difference when we break it down by the subscale on the TFI. So this is looking at tier 2 only. And the sections of the tier 2 subscales are teams. So that's what we're talking about today. Teams, how your teams are basically the logistics around the teams. And then the intervention items are there. And that's talking about really how the interventions are matched. Do you have documentation of your tier 2 interventions? And then this final section here is evaluation. And I put just some of the evaluation items for the TFI here on your screen. So you can see there we've got item 2.10, and that is that the tier 2 team tracks the proportion of the students in tier 2. So that's something to think about. Do your tier 2 teams track the proportion of students that are receiving tier 2 interventions and supports? Item 2.11 is tracks the outcome data and uses decision rules. That's going to be something we talk a lot about today. Decision rules for student level decision making. So do your teams have that? And then let's see here. Oh, great. And Erica's typing an answer to our question, and I can come back to that as well. And then item 2.12 is that the teams review fidelity data. So do we have tools that are helping us know that we're doing what we said the adults in the building are doing? And then the item 2.13 is uses data to make decisions about available interventions, professional learning, and using that data to share with others across the building and maybe in our school community. So the tiered fidelity inventory is a fidelity tool that is given at the school-wide level. And actually, there's also one available for the state level implementers. And basically, it helps school teams. So each school has a leadership team. And if you're implementing PBIS, that's often called a PBIS school-wide team, or the leadership team might be the MTSS leadership team. But that team gets together at least once a year, sometimes twice a year, to look at how are all of our tiered systems working. And basically, it has these different subgroups of asks us what types of teams do we have, how are those teams supporting student instruction and interventions, and then how are we monitoring how well we're doing what we said we do. So those are the big areas of that. And thank you, Erica, for answering that question in the chat. It's a really useful tool, and Erica's placed a link there so that you can look for that. And that's something maybe we can put on the Padlet too, just so that's all gathered together in one place. So thanks for that question. Okay. Oh, yeah. And I did just add these little, the talk bubbles kind of came up with the with the presentation, but weren't on the handout. So yeah, if you look at that link, Travis, that Erica posted, and you look at the tier 2 section, these tier 2 items are directly from that. So that's just to kind of give you a jogger of like, okay, that's what we're seeing here. And that's what schools in their first 5 years are really struggling with. They're not getting the support they need in using data to make decisions about how the interventions are working at tier 2. Okay. So that kind of gives you a little bit of the background of the why we're doing what we're doing, why we're talking about tier 2, why this is a big emphasis for Patton, why this is an area of passion for me as well. And I know we do have a poll, and I was wondering if it's possible to share the poll now. Erica, let me know if I need to take my stop screen sharing so that we can share the poll. The first, I think it was 3 questions.
I think Kelly got it loaded in here for us.
Oh, great.
I can launch it.
Should I stop sharing or is that okay?
Intro poll. Yes.
Oh, I could see it. Great. Okay, so if you don't mind, everyone, take a minute to go ahead and answer the poll. We've got 3 questions there. Excellent. I see you all. It's coming in. Thanks, everyone. This is so great. See a few more coming in. We'll give you a few more minutes. Or sorry, for a few more, we'll give like 30 more seconds. We've almost got nearly everyone. Okay, I can see a few more coming in. Thank you so much. This is great. It's given us a good idea. So, and I know when we end the poll, you'll get to see the results, but I'll kind of just, as people are just wrapping up their answers, I'll see that we have mostly specialists here, variety of specialists, which makes sense. I know it's hard to get away during the school day for teachers and building administrators, but thanks to those of you showing up, about 9 or 10%, 10% of teachers and building administrators, 10% are coaches, 15% are district administrators, 18% are other. It looks like we've got, anyone else want to get their answers in? We've got 85% of you participating, so that's great. And if folks are doing check and check out, kind of 50-50, which is really interesting. So some of you are using that. And then the question I was really interested in is that last one, and that is, how many years has your school or schools, depending on what level you're at, been actively implementing tier 2 systems of support for students that integrates behavior plus social, emotional, and mental health supports? And it looks like most people are in the 2 to 5 year area. So 2 to 3 years, 33%, 4 to 5 years, 23%. Let's see, 6 or more years, 11%. Wow. Put that hand out forward, reach it across your shoulder and give yourself a pat on the back for 6 or more years. That's amazing. And then a few folks, 18%, just 1 year, and looks like 16% are planning on next year. So that's great. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing that. Thank you everyone for participating in the poll. I'm going to share that so you can see. And now I think everyone can see those results. Is that right?
they should be able to.
Okay, great. Yeah, so just really interesting to keep in mind that as we're going through these slides, you all are coming at it from different lenses of implementation. You're just starting or you've been doing it for a while. Thank you, Jennifer, for letting us know you could see the results. That's great. Okay, thanks so much. Okay, so just a few meeting norms. I think that's always an important thing. Just like we have classroom rules, it's good to have meeting norms as well. I just wanted to put out there, move your body as needed and stay hydrated. Sometimes we get so busy, and for those of you who maybe this is like a little break where you actually get to sit in your office quietly for a bit, use this time to hydrate, use the restroom, go coming back and forth when you need to. The other thing I'll say, I know it's a little bit of a longish online presentation, so take notes. I find that that's something that really helps me to stay engaged, chat away. I know we don't have the chat box like we usually do, but we've got the Q&A. Feel free to use that, and offer words of encouragement. I've got that on here. Cheer each other on. And if you're with someone in the room with you, give each other a pat on the back and those positive words. I know that the day-to-day can get a little draining sometimes. So I want this to be a really positive place where you feel encouraged, because you are going to see some things on these slides that you're going to say, oh, hey, we're already doing that. Yes. And some other things were like, oh, okay, maybe we can do that a little bit differently. So this is a positive, supportive environment. Please ask those questions as needed. Share your lessons learned as you're typing those questions too, so that we can get a bit of the context. And if you can, I know it's hard, close out those competing tabs, those other internet searches you've got going on to get someone to, whatever's going on at the school, order some supplies, whatever you've got going on. So try to do that as we move forward. Okay. So now I'm going to jump in to the main content here, talking about tips. So TIPS is team initiated problem solving. And I want to let you know that TIPS isn't a new thing. It has not just come up and is the latest, greatest trend. And instead, it has, over 15 years of funding available from or supported from the U.S. Department of Education. The first grant was awarded to Dr. Rob Horner at the University of Oregon in 2007. Then he received another award in partnership with colleagues at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Dr. Bob Algazine and Kate Algazine. And that was, 2012. And then I received a grant in 2017 to continue the work to look at Tier 2 and TIPS, applying this team-initiated problem solving within a Tier 2 environment. And I will say it's not confirmed yet, but we are being considered for a new grant for this upcoming year. So keep your fingers crossed for us. I will definitely be reaching out to Patton if and when that grant gets funded, but it's looking really promising. So we're very excited to be able to continue this work and to be, acknowledged by our peers. These are peer-reviewed grants. So our peers across the country review our grants, give us feedback, and really only the highest scored ones get the opportunity to receive funding. So we're very lucky that we've been in this position for so long, for the field, our colleagues, and for schools that we work with to say, yes, give us more. This is something that's really helpful, and we have the data to show that now. And join me in thinking about a team meeting you've been in recently, and think about how many people were gathered around the room. And then you think about, what are each of those people getting paid by the hour, and how expensive those meetings are, right? So I saw there were lots of administrators here. I know you all certainly keep the budgets in your mind. And we did the math to figure out, if you just have a team of 5 people and they're meeting 45 minutes monthly, we've got almost 100,000 public schools across our country. You add up all the hours, you add everything up, we're looking at millions of dollars a year in US schools, just in one team meeting for 45 minutes once a month. And we know that that's not the case, right? We know we have loads of meetings. We know we love our meetings. We have no shortage of meetings. So that is really something to think about when we're doing this. This is all about gosh, getting better outcomes for students, but then there's some really great side effects along the way, which are more efficient meetings. Personally, I worked with a tier 2 team in one of our local schools. And once we implemented the TIPS framework, we shortened the meetings from an hour to 45 minutes. So across the school year, and they were meeting on a weekly basis. So we shortened those meetings every week from an hour to 45. So reducing 15 minutes minutes a week every over the course of the school year really adds up. The other thing is that these meetings were before school started. So since I am not traditionally a morning person, I really appreciated those 15 minutes in the morning. So that's the other thing to think about, is that people really who are using this TIPS model really do feel that those meetings are run more efficiently. They're there to get the work done. Of course, we want to have our team meetings be fun and engaging, and we're happy to see our colleagues if we're lucky, right? But it's really nice to feel like you get in that meeting with a purpose. You're making the most of your time. You're being respectful to everyone's time, and you're making a difference in the students' lives. Okay. So that's, the big picture here. In order to really fully adopt TIPS, you guys are getting a wonderful sample today, a pretty good in-depth introduction. I will say that there is a more rigorous process to fully adopt the TIPS model. Today, you will be able to leave with some of these strategies and implement them, get them started tomorrow in your team meeting. So rest assured, there are some learning, some, pretty, I would say we like to look at those things as like, what's the smallest amount of change for the biggest payoff. So we definitely have some of those strategies for you here today. But in order to fully adopt the TIPS model and get the bigger outcomes, it really does involve a full day training. With the previous grant that I had, we did develop an online learning module for that full day training for teams. So we do have that now available as a beta version that we are allowing people to access for free. But we do for the whole TIPS model to adopt it, it's a full day training for teams. It's and to have a coach that's been fully trained. That you can ensure that you have access to relevant data and that you can display the data. It's really important during a TIPS meeting that you have everyone looking at the data together, at the meeting minutes notes together, so that everyone's focused and has that, singular vision. And since I'm at the University of Oregon, we use PBIS apps or the Swiss suite of tools for data. So as I go throughout our presentation, you will see some of that information. But that the TIPS, this is where the item C here is where the magic happens in the TIPS model. And I know that because we are working on publishing our paper. We are working on publishing a paper right now that basically shows that the teams that had a coach them during that TIPS meeting had better outcomes than the teams that just got the training and really had minimal coaching. So it's really important. It's, where the magic happens to have, when you first get your TIPS training, those first 2 meetings after the TIPS training, to have a coach there who can really prompt you, guide you, and make sure you're not missing any of the critical features. And then the last item here is to use the TIPS fidelity checklist to self-assess, improve, and sustain the model. And you have access to the fidelity checklist. It's in the Padlet, but also it's right on that pbs.org website. So many great resources there. pbs.org has a bunch of the TIPS materials that are available on the website. One of the other tools that you have linked on the Padlet is this idea of the tiered decision rules. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I wanted to call it out because it is a really useful tool. And for those of you that are just beginning in your tier 2 implementation process, this is something that is really, really a helpful tool to keep in mind and to have. Basically, every team within your system has a purpose and a function. And this tool that we've shared with you outlines some guidelines for what those purposes are for each team. And the tier 2 team, of course, is included in that. And as a part of that, we've also laid out the questions for that your team should be answering throughout the school year. So for example, and we've got it grouped by category. So we have implementation fidelity, current level of student proportion, trends in student proportion, trends in overall student progress, and trends in individual student data. So these are kind of the overarching categories that each team should be asking questions, but their questions are going to be different depending on what tier they're serving. So for example, at the top here, implementation fidelity, we have our systems of support in place and being implemented as planned. So some of you said you have check in, check out. So do we have that system fully in place and are we implementing it? So how are we monitoring the fidelity over time? The next question is how many students are receiving tier 2 support? So we just want to know out of all of our schools, out of all of our students, what percentage of them are enrolled or receiving supports from tier 2, from our tier 2 supplies or supports and interventions. On the far right column here, we have then an idea, a suggestion that you could use as your goal for that question. So for this one, how many students are receiving tier 2 supports? We have aim for no more than 15% of student population at one time requiring tier 2 supports. Now I'm going to put a big caveat on this. And I'm going to tell you that this was written before the pandemic. And I know that these numbers aren't exactly the same, and we should certainly aim to get back to these goals, but tier 2 looks different. Let's just be really honest. Tier 2 looks different and post-pandemic. And so that's something to keep in mind. And that's why interventions like check in, check out, which I'll talk a little bit more about, so that we have those interventions that are really economical to be able to serve a bunch of students. Okay, and so someone says, would that be 15% of the entire school, or can that be 15% at each grade level? You know, it's just it's a guidepost for the entire school. And truly it comes from more of a public health model that, you know, thinking about your resources that you have available within your school. So the key thing is to really say, you know, here's our list of interventions that we have. Here is the list of personnel who are providing those interventions, and talk to those people about how many students they can serve within each of those interventions. So if there's a school counselor who's providing a social skills group and they only have time to offer 5 social skills groups a week, and they can only have, you know, 5 students each in each of those social skills groups, then we know that capacity is at 25 students. And so we can add that to our total of students that we can serve in tier 2, along with other, economical interventions like check-in, check-out. So I hope that helps. So it can vary. And certainly I will say, just like, there are going to be some grade levels, right? We know that there's like a cohort of students that comes in and they just need a little bit more support than the cohort above them, right? Kindergarten, I remember one year I was working in a school and we had a group of kindergartners come in that were unlike, we're a very unique group of kindergartners. And we really had to think about creating stronger tier 1, because we had so many kindergartners that were needing tier 2 and tier 3 supports. So all kindergartners got pre-correction. All kindergartners got extra lessons taught every week at the beginning of the week, because we saw the need there. So you kind of just have to be flexible with that. So this is just, again, some guideposts, but some things to get you thinking about. This is the purpose of specifically the tier 2 team. I'm going to keep moving here. Maybe. There we go. So The other thing that your tier 2 team is responsible for is having this idea of how we make decisions, these decision guidelines. And this is really the bread and butter of this tool, is that we have decision rules where we say, how do we know when we want to provide supports for a student for the first time with tier 2 or tier 3? And then what are our progress monitoring guidelines? So here you can see we have some examples of decision guidelines that you can use in your schools, or you can adjust them to fit your school's context better. So we might nominate a student for tier 2 if they were receiving tier 2 supports in their previous school. If in that second bullet there, students who enroll in school after the first 3 weeks of school participate in check-in, check-out for the first week of attendance as an orientation to the school, just to give them a little bit more support. Maybe that's something your school does to give new students who come in the middle of the year a bit more support and orientation to the school. The next one we have here is a student has received 2 or more office discipline referrals. And then students have more than 5 absences in the 30-day period. And these are things that you can adjust that make sense for your school, but these are just some suggestions, some ideas, a place to start. And let's see here. Is there a difference in tier 1 tips? Yeah, well, I will say there's a tips for tier 1 and a tips for tier 2. They are very similar. There's just some minor changes, and the minor changes really have to do with the fact that tips at tier 1, you're making decisions at the group level. So you're talking about, say, fifth graders who are a group of fifth graders who are getting office discipline referrals at lunchtime because they're getting into arguments over, equipment. There's not enough basketballs and they're getting into fights. And so we need to come up with a plan there. Tier 2, we're really talking about an individual student. We're saying, this student came in the middle of the school year. They've had a lot of absences. They seem to like adult support. They're always hanging out, but they are trying to get out of class so that they can go hang out with preferential people in the building. So you're really making a plan for a student as opposed to a group of students. Okay. And they asked, is there a link to the online tips training? There's not a link at this point. The best thing is to email me, and my email is available on the PowerPoint at the end of the presentation. So thanks so much for asking about that. And then would we use multiple data points, not just one? Yeah, absolutely. It's always, thank you so much for that, Doreen. It is always important to use multiple data points. So you're not just using office discipline referrals, but you're talking to teachers in different classrooms. Maybe you're checking in with parents saying like, gosh, anything going on at home that we should know about? We noticed your students acting a little differently at school. So yes, please always use multiple data points. What a savvy crowd here we have at Patton. Thanks so much. Okay. So to get into a little bit more about what is TIPS, I want to just lay out, what are the foundations of TIPS. We have our meeting foundations, we have the problem solving process, and we have implementation decisions. So those are the 3 main elements of the team initiated problem solving process. In this section of the presentation, I'll also describe how TIPS improves the effectiveness and efficiency of team problem solving. I've already given you a little bit of an insight there, and then describe how to monitor with the TIPS fidelity checklist as well. And we have just about 15 or so slides here, and then there'll be an opportunity for a break after this section. Okay, so some assumptions that we do as part of the grant that I talked about that we had where we looked at TIPS in the tier 2 setting. these were our assumptions of the schools that we worked with. So one is that schools were using check in, check out. So you'll notice that I do use that intervention as an example throughout this presentation. For those of you who are not familiar with check in, check out, don't worry, I'll give you some more details about what that is. For those of you who are implementing check in, check out, you'll already be pros at that. But all of the schools that we worked with are traditionally implementing PBIS already, and they're using those tier 1 tools with Fidelity. They also are using, for us, we have at the University of Oregon, there's a check in, check out Swiss application. So they're keeping their data within that platform, which is really helpful and gives people easy access to the data, makes it very usable, user-friendly. As a part of our work at the University of Oregon, we're actually developing an online TIPS meeting minute application. So we're hoping that will be available in the fall of 2025 and at a broader scale. And then we'll have a beta version available for a smaller number of schools this fall 2024. And then if you're not using the TIPS meeting application, which is the online tool, then there's a TIPS meeting minutes form template, and that's linked in your Padlet. So you can download that and you can start using that. I mean, tomorrow in your meeting minutes, it's just a Word document. Some people have uploaded it to Google Docs and then they just kind of copy and paste and keep using that form for their tier 2 meetings. Let's see here. The last piece here is that the teams that we work with, they basically have a really strong focus on implementing their tier 2 interventions with Fidelity. They improve social and academic success of individual students who have been nominated for tier 2 behavioral support specifically. So that's who we were working with, but your tier 2 team is going to be working with students that have that are in need of academic support and also social emotional. And someone asked about if the TIPS meeting agenda is in the Google Doc form. It's not in the Google Doc form, it's in a Word doc, but you can upload it to Google Docs and it'll transfer over with some minimal, formatting issues. It'll still be usable. Okay. So here are our big ideas again. First up, teams are more efficient and effective when they follow the TIPS core elements. And these TIPS core elements, I'm going to keep saying this throughout the presentation, so you won't forget that part. The meeting foundations, problem solving, and these implementation decisions. And then our other big idea for this section is that TIPS is an evidence-based approach. So again, patent doesn't just give you fluff, they make sure to give you evidence-based approaches. Typical schools can learn how to use TIPS pretty well, pretty easily for a low investment of professional time to get the learning up and running. TIPS, people that are using TIPS are more effective at identifying and solving problems and finding those solutions, and that they're also more likely to produce change in student outcomes. And there's actually a large study that was published. Dr. Rob Horner was the primary researcher on that, and they found that the teams that were using TIPS had a reduction in office discipline referrals and out of school suspensions as well. So here are our 3 elements of TIPS, but it all starts at that core of effective problem solving. So it's all about effective problem solving leading to student outcomes. And these elements come together. The data, the team, the process is really where our team meeting foundations lives. And then we have our effective problem solving process. And then finally, in order to decide what to do with the data, we develop those implementation plans that will ultimately improve student outcomes. So that's where our implementation decisions are. So throughout this presentation, we will mostly be in the meeting foundations section and in the problem solving section. And because that's all we can fit in this time. So just to give you a little bit more information, about each of these core features. We use a light bulb as a metaphor to talk about meeting foundations, about the TIPS model in general, but really the meeting foundations is that stable grounding for the TIPS process. And I'll go through each of those pieces of the meeting foundations. And then, it moves up to that problem-solving process that begins with the identification of challenges with detailed precision. Collective team discussions to identify solutions that are comprehensive, practical, have contextual fit for your school. And then implementation of those solutions that the team manages and monitors to make sure that, again, we're doing what we said we would do. And ultimately, is it helping the students? If it's not helping the students, then we need to change it. And our decision rules help us decide when we need to do that. So because of this kind of cyclical nature, that's why you see there's data at the center, but then we've got the decision-making circle of steps. Each one is informed by data to maximize the effectiveness and the efficiency. But it's really grounded in data-driven cycles for your team to use to make decisions. You can see at the top there, meeting foundations. Let's see, there's my cursor. Core features, we've got, you've got a team with the right people. People know what their responsibilities are, what their authority is, what they need, what they're responsible for. The team has the right data at the right time, and that the team understands that there's a predictable process for working together. Just like kids want to feel safe in the classroom, as professionals, we want to be safe and not be caught off guard in our meetings. And so all of these foundations are something that people often look over, but really create that strong grounding for the process. The core features of the problem-solving process include using data to make decisions, right? We don't want to have too much hypothesizing. We really want to try to use the data available to us. Another key feature is defining goals. We want to know when we've reached our goal and when that student hopefully doesn't need these additional supports anymore. We want to identify a solution or an intervention that matches the challenges that the student is having. Another way of thinking about this is function-based problem solving. I know that Dr. McDaniel talked about this quite a bit, is that you're aligning the student function of the behavior to the intervention that you're matching on. So that's a part of this as well. And then of course, you're building action plan for implementing effective solutions. So if you've got a system like check in, check out, then you've got that pretty much dialed in. But sometimes if you have other interventions that require more adjustments, then that's going to take more time to plan and make those adjustments. In the implementation decision element of TIPS, we include the adoption of the solution with fidelity. So, and this means that when we say we're going to do the intervention, we're going to do it full out as much as possible. I know as a former school counselor and school psychologist, there were times when we got an intervention plan set up for a student and we were hoping that it would happen, Monday through Friday. But when it actually came down to it, the student could only get the intervention Monday, Wednesday, and Friday because of schedule changes on Tuesday and Thursday. So then, that lack of fidelity showed us that we had to adjust our plan and maybe adjust our goal because it was going to take a longer period of time for us to get to that goal. And that's why we use data to monitor if the solution is implemented and effective. And if not, then we adapt that support in response to those changes over time. So those are the core features of the three main elements. So the three main elements, again, are meeting foundations, problem-solving process, and implementation decision. And you can really think about the procedures, those core features that fit into each one of those areas. And I see a question here. Can you provide a list of tier 2 interventions aligned with common problems that teams can consider? I don't have something readily available at my fingertips, but I'm sure we could find something on our pbis.org website. And I actually wonder if Dr. McDaniel shared something like that in her presentation, and maybe someone from Patton can chime in. Oh yeah, I see Allison is typing, so thanks so much, Allison. Okay, so now we're gonna do a little, take a look at those core features again. Think about what goes into meeting foundations, just, in this very little bit that you've heard, what goes into that problem-solving process and what goes into implementation decisions. So we're gonna do a check for understanding here. So for our 3 main elements of tips, write down just at least one core feature for each of these. And I'll give you just a minute and a half or so to go ahead and do that. So go ahead and write out a few core features that you can remember that you would tell someone back at your school all about. Okay, thanks so much for taking a minute to do that. I'm going to go ahead and say a few of the core features, and I'd like you to just in your mind or on your paper, write down which element, meeting foundations, problem solving, or implementation decision you think that core feature goes within. So kind of a matching game, if you will. Okay, so this using data to identify problems with precision. Which element or which of the 3 elements does using data to identify problems with precision? If you said problem solving, you got it correct. Okay, how about this one? You have a team with the right members, they know their responsibilities, and they have the time set aside, and they have the proper people around the meeting table. Which element does that fit under? If you said meeting foundations, you are correct. And now, if you are using interventions and you're monitoring the fidelity and you're adapting those solutions based on data, which element does that fall under? You said, if you said implementation decisions, you are correct. Excellent. Give yourself a pat on the back. Thanks, everyone. Okay, I see a question here. You mentioned a previous presentation that this one connects with, and is that presentation recorded? It is. And is it available on Patton? It is. And what is the title of it? Thank you. Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Yeah, Dr. Sarah McDaniel provided a presentation, and I know someone from Patton will put a link for that, because you can see a presentation from Dr. Ty Collins, Dr. Kathleen Lane, and Dr. Sarah McDaniel, and they're all about Tier 2, various aspects of Tier 2, and just really outstanding colleagues and presentations. So thank you, Allison and Laura, for bringing that up. Was that a plant, actually, Laura? It feels like it's a question that's too good to be true. Okay, because they do have really great resources, and each one of those presentations has a Padlet to go with it. So, all right. Here's our big idea number 2, and then at the end of this section here, we'll take one of our breaks. So big idea number 2 is that TIPS is an evidence-based approach to helping teams be more effective and efficient. So we have research, so exciting. Can you tell we like data? We are data nerds here. So we have research that documents that when teams use TIPS, they are more efficient, The team meetings are more satisfying. I mean, who doesn't like an efficient team meeting when a meeting gets done early and you achieved everything on your agenda? I love that. That's one of my favorite things, right? Everyone feels good leaving that meeting. We also found through research that teams identify the problems earlier and with better precision. So there's just more focus. And so you can address the concerns and the challenges right away because you have data, because you have a process to go through, because you have decision rules. All of those structures help to create this tier 2 effective system. The teams who use tips are more likely to build solutions and action plans. And then finally, those teams follow through with their solutions and produce change in student behavior, which is the bottom line, right? That's why we're doing what we're doing in the first place. Okay, so, why have we found that the TIPS approach is successful? And the truth is, it really does come down to data, multiple points of data, right? As pointed out earlier, and that we have multiple people, multiple brains thinking on these challenges and solutions together. So the way that this came about through the research was that I was not a part of the original development team, but Dr. Rob Horner and our colleagues developed this by looking at loads of research on effective team meetings and loads of watching and, not just watching in, but sitting in on team meetings, working with schools directly and seeing how much variability there was in this process and that likely there was ways that we could do things to make things better. They worked directly with teams in schools to develop the process, so try things out, to refine them, to try it out again. And that's what we did with the TIPS Tier 2 model as well. And the research that we did, we worked with the local school district and their Tier 2 teams. I and my colleagues went out to the schools. We were on their Tier 2 teams for multiple years. And then as we were developing all of these materials, those Tier 2 team members were giving us feedback on what we were developing. And so everything that you're seeing has been developed with school-based colleagues. So it's not just the ivory tower saying, wouldn't this be nice? I don't like that. So we don't do a lot of that. And then the problem, or the last item here, is that the main elements of TIPS not only drive effective problem solving, but they avoid the common traps that really hinder the team process. And this is, what we saw firsthand, what our colleagues told us were happening in their school meetings as well. So here are some of these common traps that you may have experienced. I hope you haven't for your sake, but you can kind of just look through these common traps, a team without a clear purpose or process. Have you ever showed up to a team meeting and you don't know why you're there or what the purpose of that team is? It's happened to me. It's happened to a lot of us, right? So one thing, we use data to help solve this solution. And one thing that we use is the TIPS fidelity checklist. That TIPS fidelity checklist lets us know, who's there, what our jobs are, what we're supposed to do during that team meeting. The next common trap we have here is that the actual agenda or the problems that we're focused on are not well defined, and that we have solutions that we've developed that maybe aren't realistic, that don't fit in with our local school. Maybe someone suggested something, but that's too expensive, or we don't have an instructional aide, we don't have a teacher, we don't have an adult in the building that could actually do that. It's kind of like, well, we have a plan and wouldn't that be nice, but it can't happen. So in our cases, we're thinking about, for example, check and check out, we would use check and check out fidelity tools to see, are we actually putting the right students, serving the right students with that intervention, and is that intervention running at full capacity, at full speed? Are all the teachers able to connect with that student as they're supposed to be doing, or do we need to make some adjustments? So again, for each one of these common traps, we're using data to to combat those, kind of pitfalls. And then finally, all of our teams, all of our educators, everyone that you work with, there's no shortage of good ideas. We have so many good ideas, but all too often we write up those ideas, but then we never get them fully implemented because there's so much going on in our schools, right? We've got putting out fires all the time. So that doesn't feel good either when we come up with plans and then we don't finish them or we don't follow through. So the TIPS process also helps with that because there is follow-up across the agendas, but also, you're looking again at that check and check out fidelity data, but also the student outcome data. And if the student outcome data isn't getting better over time, and you know that because you have the data that you're looking at, but you also have your tiered decision guidelines that you're using to make decisions within set periods of time, then that's giving you the information you need to know, like, okay, we're doing it, but it's not working, or we actually never implemented that when we said we were going to place that student in the intervention. So it's really important. Part of the core of this TIPS model is using data throughout the fidelity process, checking the adult behavior, but then also the student data as well. So just as a little check for understanding, how are data used to inform each of the core elements of TIPS? So just kind of, I mentioned those 3 different methods. So you can just take a note here. Foundations, what tool did we say we could use? Problem solving, what are some examples of tools? And implementation, what are some examples of data that you can look at? And if you're not using check and check out, write what data you use in your building to look at that problem solving and decision-making process and that implementation fidelity process. And I'll give you just a minute here to jot some notes. Okay, so you should have, under the foundations, the TIPS fidelity checklist is a source of data that you would use. You might also put like your team meeting minutes and agenda there. Under problem solving, you would use intervention fidelity data or student outcome data, whatever that is in your school. And for the implementation of the implementation decisions, you're using the same thing, the student outcome data or the fidelity data. So with that, Erica, I think this would be a good opportunity to take a little break. I think folks have been going for just over an hour.
Yeah, absolutely. How long of a break would you like us to take at this point in time?
Why don't we do just a 10-minute break?
Okay.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, we will return at 1:23. 10 minutes.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Do you need anything?
No, that's for all. Thank you for the wonderful questions. I really appreciate presenting to such a knowledgeable crew of people. Before we jump into, I'm going to share my screen again here, and we'll just take a look at the Padlet. So you can see everything that you have there. And I just want to highlight here. So this tips template is the one I was talking about where you have a Word document that you could go ahead and upload to your Google document secure setting for your school district. You have your TIPS fidelity checklist. This is for the tier 2 teams in particular. There is also the fidelity checklist for tier 1 teams is also available on the PBIS website. Just use the search bar to find that one. And then we have this how school teams use data to make effective decisions. And that is a practice guide that we published. I'm the lead author along with Rob Horner and Ron Denise and Bob Algazine, a great team of Jessica Daly, if any of you have received training from Jessica. So a really stellar team. We put together kind of it's more focused on tier 1 teams, but it gives you the nuts and bolts of and the overview of the TIPS process. And then if there's time at the end of our presentation today, we'll watch part of this video together, but there are other example TIPS meetings on the pbis.org website. This is just one of them. So you can just search for TIPS on the pbis.org website. And thanks to the patent team for putting the TFI on there. And then this is the other document I was talking about, the tiered decision guideline for social behavioral and academic behavior supports there. And yeah, just it's a good place to kind of start at, I would say, you know, if you're thinking about coming up with your own decision rules, which you should if you're implementing tier 2, then that's a great starting guideline. And then here are the other tier 2 Padlet from our other speakers. They were really wonderful presentations. And then the TFI validation study. So it looks like we've got everything up there. And then the book, and then this is the discount code, the ASIE 30 for this week only. So take advantage of that if you'd like. Okay, let's see here. While I have the screen up, here is the pbis.org website, and here is that tiered decision guidelines. You have the PDF, but just in case you lose it, you can always find it again on the pbis.org website. And the other thing I want to show you here is that when you just go to pbis.org, easy way to find the TIPS materials, etc., is to go to topics and to click on data-based decision making. And when you do that, click on the see more. If you scroll down to this this database decision making topic, you'll actually get to some information about the TIPS process. And we have a few short videos in here. This one is with Rob Horner and talking about the TIPS.
Nitty-gritty of the decisions you're making.
About the TIPS process. So you can see that there. So I just wanted to be sure that you knew where you can find those other resources. So throughout here, we've got just little brief videos about the TIPS process. And then the other thing you can do, like here under presentations and videos, let's click on that. Well, let's go to videos. And we're still working out some of the kinks here. Or a bug here. We've got keyword and then click on TIPS. TIPS has its own keyword on the pbis.org website. And then you'll get a list sorted of some of the TIPS videos. So we will watch today this tier 2 and tier 3 coordination meeting, but there's also a TIPS training meeting, which is kind of a non-example of a team meeting, I'll say. And then we also have these other examples of teams using the TIPS process. So you can watch these with your team. And then to wrap up our last the module that we just covered about the foundations and the big ideas of TIPS, I wanted to show you that, you know, it is an evidence-based process. This is the What Works Clearinghouse, which is a clearinghouse from the U.S. Department of Education, and they review research studies on interventions in education and TIPS. And that the study I told you about that Rob authored was reviewed here, and you can see here that it meets WWC standards without reservations. That means that it meets the highest level of the research design standards. It also has at least one statistically significant positive finding, and actually there were 2. And then it is at tier 1, it's determined tier 1 strong. So at least one finding shows strong evidence of effectiveness. So this is the highest rating you can have right now on the What Works Clearinghouse website. So we're really proud to be able to continue that work. And maybe, yeah, so that's something that you can find there as well. The other thing I'll say is that I'm just so passionate about multi-tiered system support and PBIS. And I will say there's a lot of misinformation out there on the internet, on social media. And so I've really, in my free time, imagine that there is a little bit of free time. In my free time, I have really been making it my mission to get evidence-based information out there. And as such, I've actually just launched my own website called mtssolutions.com. And I'm going to be launching some online modules about MTSS Foundation specifically. That's evidence-based research and all of that as well. So, we've got a lot of things going on at the University of Oregon, and then in my free time doing some consulting and some other stuff. But I wanted to let you all know about that. If your schools are doing MTSS and you're looking for an easy and efficient way of training people just on the foundations of MTSS, then check this out, because this summer I'll be launching those modules. So exciting times. Okay. Well, now I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again with my slides here so we can get back to our PowerPoint presentation. Okay, and keep those questions coming. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so yeah, the new MTSS training that I'll be launching this summer is the website's mtssolutions.com. So just make sure to get those 3 S's in there, mtssolutions.com. Okay, so in this previous module, we went ahead and did define the 3 main elements of the TIPS process. You probably can say those off the top of your head now. Say them with me. Meeting foundations, problem solving, and implementation decisions. Great. You can describe how TIPS improves the effectiveness of and efficiency of your team process, and you can define how to adopt TIPS. So we talked about those 2 days of training and using TIPS as intended by using that fidelity checklist. So check those off of our list of things to do today. And just keep those questions coming too. If you have questions, thoughts, if anyone wants to share just any ahas from just kind of hearing this foundational information, we're all ears. So please feel free to use the Q&A in that way as well. Okay, now let's jump into the meeting foundations a little bit more because there are multiple elements to the meeting foundations process. I'll go over this kind of quickly because some of it is just common sense, and you will this is where you'll really be able to say like, oh, give yourselves a pat on the back, because you'll be able to recognize that. And I just want to make sure, you know what, I lost my, sorry here, I lost my screen. I couldn't see, let me get that in here. Okay. For some reason, my PowerPoint, I'm not able to see this. Okay, so if maybe one of the patent people could send me a little message to make sure that you're able to see my PowerPoint slides, that would be great.
We are not.
Okay, yes, that's what I thought. For some reason, my Zoom displays have gone away. Let me try this again. Okay. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so the meeting foundations has 9 elements to it. So we'll go over those 9 elements together. And then I'll have you reflect on one of your own recent meetings, and then think about those aspects of the meeting foundation for your own team. So let's take a look at those. Our big ideas for this one is that meeting foundations, of course, includes 9 elements. There's a general flow to the meeting. So there's kind of a set agenda, which is nice because then you don't have to be guessing about what's happening during the meeting. And our meeting foundations include these areas, which we'll cover right now. So, and just reminder, this is a part of the whole process, right? So we've got our 3 big components: team, problem solving, and implementation decisions. And although you will get some benefits from just doing the team meeting foundations, the real power happens when you get to the effective problem solving and implementation. So here we are at the top section of this graph that we looked at earlier in that meeting foundations area. So why do we even need meeting foundations in the first place, right? Well, basically the earlier research on tips really found that the teams became more efficient and more effective in their whole problem-solving process. Because teams had this predictable, consistent process, it encouraged team members to actually attend the meetings regularly, consistently. And having those consistent roles and that setup allowed teams with that in that final bullet there to have a team purpose, a goal, and that facilitated effective decision making. So it's really important to take the time to establish and revisit meeting foundations as a part of this evidence-based practice. Keeps us all organized. So here are the 9 meeting foundations, and this is kind of a close-up zoom in of the TIPS fidelity checklist and the first 9 items, which are the meeting foundations component. So we'll go into each of these, but they have a total of 2 points. So there's a total of 18 points for each of the items in these 9 meeting foundations. It's a 3-point scale. So if for those of you who administered the tiered fidelity inventory, this is our favorite way of scoring checklist, where we have 0 is not in place, 1 is partially in place, and 2 is in place. So we will take a closer look at each one of these. But essentially, the team you're working with or you're hoping to establish is a tier 2 team, and they are in charge of establishing the interventions in your school and really watching that flow, monitoring that flow of students who are being served by the intervention, whose needs are being met by the intervention, who are being taken off the interventions, and then new students coming in, adjustments being made, and then students moving to tier 3 and to, back to tier 1. So, just to touch upon that question earlier, someone asked about the purpose of the tier 1 team. The tier 1 team is going to be responsible for coordinating the school-wide systems, what we call the universal systems. And that includes, the school-wide expectations, making sure that teachers feel confident in communicating those expectations in their classroom and translating those into their classrooms. And then, so it differs in that way, in that the tier 1 team is thinking about all students, and the tier 2 team is thinking about some students and how the some students are supported in addition to those universal levels. It is really important for there to be communication between those 2 teams as well. Okay, so, you can think about your own team and reflect on, gosh, do we have a clear purpose for our tier 1 team and our tier 2 team? Is there overlap? Sometimes there's people who might overlap between the teams, and that's okay, as long as that person or, a couple people are sharing information between the teams so that you've got good communication going on there. That tiered decision guideline PDF that you have has the purposes for all 3 meetings, even though today we're just focusing on the tier 2. Okay, so thinking about that tier, the fidelity checklist, the TIPS fidelity checklist, tier 2 specifically, item 1 is purpose. Does your team have a distinct and defined purpose? And do they have a decision guideline and evaluation plan? So, we also suggest that, this is covered every time you have a new person come on the team. This is covered at the beginning of the school year and maybe sometimes throughout the school year as well, just to remind everyone what the purpose is, because, we know that sometimes people can get distracted by other things. So that we've got that call out there. So purpose, agenda, and logistics are a part of these first items that we'll look at. So here's an example of a tier 1 team purpose. Coordinate the implementation of tier 1 systems and supports, monitor fidelity and overall status of progress towards goals, and then identify, develop, and implement the database plans, communicate with other school teams. So basically all of those 4 purposes broadly are on the screen there. Here are the same idea with tier 2. Again, remember, we're just using check and check out as an example, but you would use whatever menu of interventions you have at your school. But the idea is that this team coordinates the identification and selection of students who are in need of these additional supports. They monitor the implementation of the fidelity of those supports, and then they monitor student progress receiving those supports, and then they make the decisions based on the data and the other, what teachers say, what's working, what parents say, what's working, et cetera. So those are examples of the different purposes. So back to that tiered decision guideline, these guidelines really provide a structure for reviewing the tier 2 systems, update for implementation fidelity and student outcomes. There's, another set of guidelines that are used for nominating new students for tier 2 and for monitoring student progress. So I just want to recommend that everyone, after this presentation, take the time to read through these. And it really provides a sort of blueprint for you as you're setting up your decision guidelines in your school. Let's see here. Great. Oh, good. Someone said we use this checklist after meetings to help us determine the areas where we need to improve to make our meetings run smoothly. I love that. That is exactly how it can be used. So that's really wonderful. Okay, let's see. Oh, someone got a block here. Yeah, well, we can come back to it. I can make sure that we place a link on the Padlet for the www.mtsssolutions.com. So I'll make sure that gets fixed. Okay, so for one thing, you thinking about who's coming into our tier 2, who are we monitoring the progress for tier 2, and then how are we making sure that students are making success? So those are kind of our different decision rules, okay? So we have decision guidelines for new student nominations, and we talked a little bit about these at the top, but tier 2 screening and selection criteria. The student maybe was receiving tier 2 at a previous school, they've come in late to the school year, maybe they're getting a bunch of office discipline referrals. And then let's see here. Another key feature for check and check out actually to keep in mind is that the student is not in crisis. Check and check out is not an intervention for a student who is experiencing a crisis. If there are more serious concerns regarding a student's mental health issues, antisocial behavior, or there's like significant family support coordination that needs to happen, then an intervention like check and check out is not the best match. Okay, so that's something to think about when you're matching student need and the interventions available. So essentially, your team is going to come up with what is the selection criteria or the nomination criteria, and then this criteria is going to get shared across the whole school building so that teachers know, hey, I have a student that has experiencing some things I think check and check out, or another intervention might be right for them. And then they bring that student to the tier 2 team to make decisions about how that's going to work out. Now, in the progress monitoring component, you are thinking about student outcomes. So students who are already enrolled in tier 2, they're being served by an intervention in your tier 2 system, and you're thinking about what your outcomes are for the students. So maybe it's a plan that's supported by an IEP, so you've already got goals set that you're trying to monitor those goals. We have a note here that once you've already established that the intervention is happening, so that's the fidelity piece, then you're really there to decide a couple of things. You've got a couple of different decision points. One, should we maintain the intervention? 2, should we modify the intervention? Or 3, should we terminate or just stop the intervention, move to tier 3, or maybe it's worked so well, we're going to scaffold the student off and move them back to their tier 1 only supports. So these are the 3 big decisions that your teams will need to make once a student is enrolled in tier 2, and you want to have a plan for how your team is going to make those decisions. So that's the big thing that tier 2 teams, this is the bread and butter of what you all are doing. And you'll note here that we also have a suggestion for how long you should allow a student to be in an intervention, enrolled in an intervention, receiving supports before you make one of these big decisions. We know that interventions take time, student behavior takes time to adjust to these environmental changes. And so, we put 6 weeks here. That way you're still being timely. I know if any of you are also familiar with progress monitoring and academics, usually we're looking at 10 weeks for academics because the academic skills don't change that quickly for us to see a dramatic change and for us to get to that goal that we have established. But the behavior is a shorter timeline. So you can adjust this based off of your school, the students, and the behaviors that you're looking to target. So these again are just some examples here to start from. Our tips at the next item on the fidelity checklist, items 2 and 3, is all about the agenda. And here, this team had check-in, check-out coordination team meetings because that was their main tier 2 intervention. But this is just your tier 2 interventions. You can see the top of the form has the logistics, the nuts and bolts. Do we have an agenda? Do we have current and accurate data? Our meeting minutes are there to help us, guide who's there, who's supposed to be there, what our roles are. And I'll talk about this role component here in a minute. But we've got the, facilitator, the minute taker, a data entry person, a data analyst. You might have a administrator as well. We definitely recommend that you have someone on your team that has that administrative authority. The agenda is pretty much always the same. You're always kind of doing some housekeeping. You're making sure you've got your fidelity data. You're always taking a look at the student data, nominating new students, checking on the progress monitoring of the ongoing student supports, and then, making decisions about those plans. Another feature of the TIPS process is identifying if the previous meeting minutes were present and available during the meeting. The purpose of those meeting minutes is to help refresh our memory. So when you're in the new meeting, you want to be sure you have the old meeting minutes so that you can say, oh yeah, we talked about that last week. We don't have to rehash those details. It's already there. So it will help you save time, and it just keeps everyone in good communication, and it helps with that efficiency component of our process. So in our, with the logistics here, items 4 and 6 on the TIPS fidelity checklist, is that, I know this sounds nitpicky at some point, but it is just really an important part of respecting everyone's time. Everyone is so busy during the school day. So getting the meeting started and ended on time. And if your team decides that you need more time to meet, that it's not just one person saying like, okay, well, we didn't finish, so we got to stay another 10 minutes. Instead, we actually recommend that you take a vote and you ask, hey, we need more time to talk about this student that we didn't get to. Can we take a vote? Who's available to stay an extra 5 minutes, an extra 10 minutes? If you need more than 10 minutes, we recommend that you schedule another meeting. That is just not fair to people's schedules to go over. And it just brings down morale, frankly, when people feel burdened by having to stay over the allotted meeting time. So always get that team member agreement for going outside those meeting times. We ask in our teams and tips process that folks are on time, that they stay for the full meeting. We inform whoever is the team facilitator of any anticipated tardiness or absences. And like I said, if the discussion is going to go beyond that, everyone agree or extend the meeting altogether. So just thinking about your own meetings, you can make some notes or check marks. Do we have this in our building? Do we have a set agenda for our team meetings? Do we have assigned roles for our teams? Do we always start and stop on time? So little things like that really add up to the overall culture of the team and the team meetings. And then number 5 here, the next meeting was scheduled by the conclusion of the meeting, and that is reviewed at the beginning of the meeting. So everyone's got lots of notice for when the meetings are occurring on their calendar. And so you can anticipate someone not being there and any coverage that's needed. And then item number 6 is that the meeting minutes are distributed to all team members within 24 hours, if possible, of the conclusion of the meeting. So this is, again, a part of, tasks get assigned in meetings. And I admit I'm not always the best note taker during a meeting, and I might not remember that I had a task, or if I had 5 tasks, I don't remember all the tasks. So by the having someone on the team email out the meeting minutes to everyone or sending out the link to everyone, make sure that everyone is staying on top of their tasks, their responsibilities for the meeting. So again, this is all a part of that efficient team meeting culture. And the note there at the bottom is about our application that we are in development with and have used with some of our research schools. Okay, so let's look at the roles and responsibilities. This deals with items 7 and 8 on the TIPS fidelity checklist. And we have 5 main roles. So you can see here, we have the facilitator, the data analyst, the minute taker, the administrator, and we also have a team member, people who sit on the team who don't have an assigned role other than to participate in the meeting. The administrator's role is really primarily to be an administrator. And think about the teams that you're working on and working with. Ideally, the administrator is not also the facilitator, is not also the data analyst, is not also the minute taker. And I'm laughing because I have seen this, I have experienced this myself, where maybe not the principal, but an assistant principal is facilitating and is bringing in the data. And that, again, is just not an efficient way of doing things. And it really just helps the team culture to have everyone involved playing a role and knowing what their responsibility is. Someone asked, should the same person have the same role from meeting to meeting, or should these roles change? So that is it's in part up to your team, but we do suggest that everyone have an assigned role for a specified period of time. I don't recommend that it change every meeting, because that's going to take meeting time away. The point of this is to be efficient. So you could rotate through by, beginning of the year and end of the year, or even, most schools that we work with, honestly, they choose someone to be in that role for the duration of the school year. Another important component of this is that we also have a backup person. So most of the teams that we've worked with, especially at tier 1 and at tier 2, are often about 8. Tier 1 is often about 10 people. Tier 2 is often about 8 people on a team. So, you can have 2 people assigned to be facilitator. So if the main facilitator isn't there, you've got a substitute. Same thing with the minute taker. Main minute taker isn't there, backup minute taker knows it's their job. We don't even have to do any talking about it at the beginning of the meeting. It's just, oh yeah, I'm the backup minute taker. I'm on it. I'm ready to go. So that's something important to consider. The administrators can be like a teacher on special assignment. The idea here is that someone has the authority to make those administrative decisions, or to be able to follow up on those administrative decisions, so that doesn't hold up the team. So items 7 and 8 on the checklist is that each role has a primary and a backup, as I mentioned, and that when the primary person is called away, you've got your backup person, and backup people can shift into that role and agree to be in that period of time for the term or for a set number of meetings. So thank you for that answer, or for that question. And as I mentioned, administrators are there, but that they're really focused on that primary role of listening, participating, helping to make decisions. They're not facilitating the meeting. They're not taking the notes in the meeting. So in that document, the tiered decision guidelines, you have this matrix, if you will, the team member responsibilities, facilitator responsibilities, data analyst, minute taker, administrator, what's the job for everyone at hand? And we've broken it out by before the meeting, during the meeting, after the meeting, so you have a sense of what everyone is supposed to do. Why my slide is being slow to progress here. Doesn't want to move ahead. Let me try to move forward here. There we go. So now let's talk about the general flow of a TIPS meeting. So first is, calling the meeting to order, of course, who was present. And it is important as part of the TIPS process to document who's there and who isn't there. And this isn't to call anyone out, but it is to be able to say, the majority of the people are here the majority of the time. And if we have any one team member who just has conflicts all the time, they can't make it, then hey, it's okay. Let's not have them on the team. Let's find someone else. So there's no shaming for not showing up, but there's a way to say like, okay, now's, this isn't a good time for you to be on the tier 2 team. So let's move on and get someone else. Who should we nominate? At the top of the meeting, you're also going to review the agenda, make sure that it looks okay to everyone. And if there's any other items that should be added. Then we have our update on progress and problem solving on previously defined solutions, problems that you're looking at. So this is where you're doing that progress monitoring, where the solutions we're talking about, looking at the data. How did the data differ from last time? Is the data better? Is it worse? Did we achieve our goal, and what's happening next? Someone else, is the general flow of the meeting the same for tier 1 and tier 2? Yes, it's generally the same. It's basically the same. And the difference is, again, that's really at the core level of student level versus groups of students, or whole school. Thank you for that question, Bridget. After you're doing the progress monitoring of students who are currently on tier 2, then we move to the next section where we're doing problem solving on new students who have been nominated for tier 2. So here the team will ask questions. What's the precise nature of the problem? Identify the precise statement that I'm going to talk about in the next section. Then we develop the solution plan, identify the goal, and then determine fidelity and outcome. So there's a lot that happens in these middle 2 sections of the flow of your meeting. And then next is kind of towards the end of the meeting, you're doing the wrap up. You are looking at those kind of general housekeeping rules or items. Did we complete the task assigned? Do additional items have action plans? What else do we need to do just to make sure our team is functioning properly? Okay. And then the final wrap up for the meeting. We actually, as a part, you'll notice this on the TIPS meeting template that you have, is that you'll have some wrap up questions at the very end there, where we ask the team to ask themselves, was our meeting time used well? Is there anything we need to do differently at the next meeting? We also ask some questions about, are the action plans that we are implementing having the intended effects on the students' outcomes? So we ask the teams to really reflect on, is what we're doing actually working? Does it matter? Are we, is this a good use of our time? So this is another feature that really helps to be kind of a temperature taking at the end of every meeting to make sure that your team is getting the job done. Okay, so again, this is kind of just that idea that, you've got your tier 1 team purpose and your team, you've got people assigned to who's to each of these roles. And it's really helpful to have a sheet like this so that your team is organized and basically aware of their purpose, the agreements that you have at the beginning of the meeting, you know, who the team members are, what their job is, and then, of course, you know, who's the primary, who's the backup, and then, you know, what the schedule is as well. It's great. Someone's asking, Christina here has a really wonderful question. She says, I know we're talking a lot about behavior, but any recommendations how we could also be looking at academics too, when teachers are usually coordinating and implementing tier 2 interventions for their class versus a coordinator like a counselor that's delivering in charge of interventions for the whole school or grade van? Yeah, it's a really great point, Christina. And that when we get into the next section where we talk about the precision statements, that's really where you're going to be bringing in the academic component too. So that when you're talking about a student, obviously you know, I've got my behavior side, social emotional side, academic side. So when you're bringing that student to the team, you're thinking about all components of the student because, you know, of course, the academics affects the behavior, behavior affects the academics, social emotional, it's all integrated, right? So absolutely, we do, you know, hope that you bring in the academic component to it. When you're talking about like teachers coordinating for their class versus a team coordinating the tier 2 supports, I will say that is a little bit of a different model. You know, and I'd be really curious actually to talk with you afterwards to see how that's working. So I can learn basically about that. But most of the schools I've worked with, honestly, have a tier 2 team, and they will support the teachers in the implementation of tier 2 supports in their classroom, but it's not the teacher on their own coming up with the plan. But certainly the teachers are a huge component of it, right? Collecting the data in the classroom. So yeah, so anyway, I hope that as we go through, that'll become a little bit more clear in the next section. And then, you know, I would say too, if other people have some good ideas how they're doing it in their schools, since we had some people who said they've been implementing tier 2 for a long time, I would say throw that in the chat too as a suggestion for Christina and something to think about. So thanks so much. Someone asked, should the tier 2 members be part of the tier 1 team? Absolutely, there's usually overlap. You know, some of our schools are only so big, right? So you only have so many adults in the building and you don't have enough people to go around. So it is a good idea for there to be at least 1 or 2 people overlapping, but you don't want to burden people too much. So anyway, that's something to think about. And it's okay, you know, I know the school year, we're smack dab in the middle tail end of it almost. So, you know, it's okay to readjust, and this is a really good time to be thinking about how you want to set up your teams for next year. And, you know, check in with people and say, hey, I noticed you were on both teams. Was that too much for you? Or, you know, how can we improve communications where we can just have one person overlap and that person can be, or maybe 2 people and one is a backup or something. So I'm not going to go into depth about this, but I did want to give you this information. First up, there's my email address. So for those of you who have follow-up questions afterwards, I'm happy to communicate over email. One of the things to talk to me about if you're interested is we have a beta field test version of this tips checklist online, and I can give this access to anyone right now and anyone can use it. It's just not, you have to be on the field test component of the PBIS assessments. So anyway, if you want to fill out the tips fidelity checklist online and get a nice little report that summarizes it for you over time, I can give that access to you. Okay, someone asked, let's see here. I think we got that first one. And then, are the tiered decision guidelines editable? They are not. The ones that are on the pbis.org website are not editable, but if you'd like a Word document version, I can make that available to you. And maybe the best thing to do would be for me to email that to the patent crew, and then they can add it to our tablet afterwards. Because I'm guessing if you're asking Elizabeth, other people would like it as well. Okay, so we have covered, the 9 elements of the meeting foundations. And I think now it's pretty straightforward to do this fidelity checklist piece. You've had the chance, you've understood how you can go ahead and do that next step here. So any questions, any more questions? I think we've been doing a good job of answering the questions thus far. Okay, so let's jump into actually, I'm wondering, well, let's jump into the precision problem statement. So just a little bit of a caveat here. As you know, it's called TIPS and team initiated problem solving. And we talk a lot about identifying the problems, solving the problems, and problems can also be perceived as problematic. The word problem can be a problem for people. So I do want to just put that out there that at the University of Oregon and on the PBIS apps team, the training team, I've talked to my colleagues there, that we are looking at shifting away from the problem language and instead just talking about precision statements. And, because I think sometimes, especially at the tier 2 level, people hear problem and then unfortunately they think problem kid. And instead they're not thinking problem situation. What's the challenge around the student that is not allowing the student to, live fully into their potential in that setting. So that is something I will say that as we go through this, we are working to adapt the language so that we're moving away from just problem solving. And instead, we're, all about solution creation and using precision statements to come up with that for that solution creation. Okay, so now we are moving to that middle section of the TIPS process to the problem solving process here. So we're looking at, using data to make decisions, defining goals, selecting solutions, etc. Okay. Now, someone asked a question, are you differentiating tier 2 meetings between a tier 2 systems level meeting and a tier 2 system student-centered problem solving meeting? Michelle, this is an excellent question. And I'm not making that distinction right now. I'm kind of putting them all under the same umbrella. So, and I've worked with schools that have used different models where there's as you saw on our website, there's a tier 2 coordination team meeting, and then there's more the student-centered problem solving meeting. And, in my experience, there might be a smaller group that is, so let's say we have a larger tier 2 meeting, maybe you've got 10 people on that team, but then there's a smaller group, maybe 4 people who are on that systems level, and they're keeping the systems level piece. And they meet, every other week, and the larger groups meets every other week. So that group of 4 people is essentially meeting every week. So, you can structure those meetings for whatever makes sense for your team and your context. So really great question, Michelle. And again, I'm, it's a curious thing to see how people work it out. And it just depends on the size of the school, the location of the school, people you have available, all of that. Okay, so this is really the crux of the TIPS process here at this precision statement development piece. And I'm going to ask, I realize in my settings here, I can no longer see, oh wait, can I see the time? I can see the time here. Okay, sorry, too many screens and things moving. So we're going to jump into the precision statement. We are then going to talk about how to use office discipline referral data. I'm going to give you an example specifically of how to use that data to come up with your precision statements. And then we'll talk a little bit about check in, check out. And let's see here. I think we'll probably take a little break here. Let's see, and not too long. Someone's asking, so could an example of this be a team of about 8 that includes a leadership, et cetera, that looks at implementation success? Yes, of tier 2 interventions, and then a check in, check out specific team that meets in the off weeks to problem solve individual students. Yeah, absolutely, Christina. That's a great way of putting it. So yeah, we're going to talk about these 6 points and with ODR data and check in, check out data and how to use those data to make decisions. This is that fidelity checklist, looking at it, the bigger component of it all together. And then specifically, we are down here on items 12 and 13 right now. So we're looking at quantitative data were available and reviewed, and that at least one student concern was defined with precision. And you'll see that we define precision with these 6 features. And I just want to say, I did not do all these animations. I have someone amazing. We have a research assistant on our team who does all these great animations for us. So yeah, I am not that skilled. So here is the crux of the precision statement. So this is something you can take away for tomorrow, in addition to the meeting foundations, but your next tier 2 meeting, if you're in that student study team, that student intervention team, and you're really focused on how can we make this student's life easier, better, safer, more predictable, so that they can minimize these challenging behaviors that they're exhibiting. Look for these 6 figures in your action statement plan. Who is the plan for? What is the challenge that they're facing? What's the behavior they're exhibiting? Where is that behavior happening? When is it happening? When during the day? Why is it happening? And this is really where Sarah McDaniel's presentation lived, is in this why and thinking about the function of the behavior, and then the frequency of the behavior. So those 6 figures features allow you to come up with a really strong action plan, a solution that's matched on to those 6 precision points. So here's an example of one statement that we often hear, right, when we go into a meeting. Celia is being disruptive in class. Oh, we all know a Celia from time to time, but that doesn't give us enough information to come up with a strong solution. So it's kind of fuzzy, not quite in focus. Let's look at another option here. Celia is being disruptive. She's talking out, she's tapping her pencil on the desk, and she's giggling a lot in class. She's doing this to get peer attention. This happens during 3rd, 4th, and 5th periods. It's happening about 4 times during a 50-minute period. And academically, we know she has the skills to do the work. So we're not concerned about that, okay? So you can see our who, what, when, where, why, and how often embedded in that precision statement. So let's go ahead and take another few samples here, look at examples together. And as I'm going through and reading this, go ahead and count if we have our 6 precision points. We have an increasing trend of minor disrespect and disruption with a group of 5 7th graders. The disruptions and disrespect are most likely to occur during the last 15 minutes of our block periods when students are engaged in independent seat work. This appears to be maintained by adult attention. Currently, this is happening once a day. Okay, so you should, precise or not precise? Yes, this is a precise statement. We have all of our 6 features there. Here is another one. Joshua displays low levels of disruptive behavior in a classroom setting. This occurs during large group instruction. He seems to want adult attention because he calls out to ask questions. And the disruptive behavior occurs more frequently after 5 minutes of large group instruction at a rate of about twice a day. So precise or not precise? Yes, we do have all of those features there, so it is precise. So now it's your turn to check these 4 precision statements. Let's see here. And I want you to read these 4 statements and then just to note on your page if they are precise or not precise. Okay, I'm going to give you about a minute or so to do that. Okay, you should have your precise or not precise identified. So let's go through these four together. So on the first one, it's not precise. Doesn't have all 6 features there. The next one is clearly not precise, right? Was a freebie, an easy one. The next one, also not precise. Wait, what's happening here? And then the last one is precise. So, one thing to point out here is that just because it's long and has a lot of information doesn't mean that it's got those 6 precision points. This last one, Allie talks out to get adult attention. So there's those 3 items right there. She's disruptive usually during a whole group instruction in the classroom, and she's doing it about 4 times a day. So there are 6 of those precision items within a very short sentence. So it doesn't have to be long and wordy. Okay, so we went ahead and talked about these items that, we did the big idea where we talked about the precision statements and those 6 pieces of the precision statements. But now let's talk about how to identify those precision statements when you're using office discipline referral data. Maybe, there it goes. Okay. So Serena Johnson will use this example. Here we've got that with this one, we're developing a precision statement using our ODR data. This is September 10th through September 14th data. And unfortunately, our friend Serena has gotten 10 ODRs in 5 school days. Uh-oh, that is not good, right? That's definitely a student who is calling out for help, and we need to figure out how this environment, what's going on so that we can improve things for her. So we know who the who is, Serena. And we can look at our data here, and I'm sure it's a little bit small on your screen there, but we've got the problem behavior here on the right upper corner where it says the biggest one here is for harassment. Harassment and inappropriate language are our 2 challenging areas. So we can look at the time of the day in the bottom left-hand corner. So we can see that it's about 9:15 to 10 a.m. and 12 to 12:45 are where our area is peaked. And then you can see there where it's happening, the location graph. We can see bus, class, and hall, but mostly in the classroom in the hallway. And then the motivation is the why. So to get the pattern, to obtain student attention or other peer attention and adult attention. So this student is really interested in the attention. And then later on, we're going to calculate the frequency of her behavior. So we've got the who, the what, the when, the where, the why. So in order to determine the frequency of the problem behavior, you can use the ODR data and you use average instances per day. So how often a behavior occurred across a given time frame. So for example, how often a student engages in inappropriate language use in math class during a 5-day period. If the student used an inappropriate language 3 times a day in 5 days in math class, you would do an average of 0.6 instances of inappropriate language in math class. So here's the math there. Basically, you're dividing 3 by 5 and you get 0.6 times a day. So let's look at another example here. So back to Allie, and Allie talks out to get adult attention. She's disruptive, which means she's talking out, waves hands and sighs, usually during whole group instruction in the classroom. She has 16 instances of disruptive behavior in the past 4 days. Oh my gosh. So we're doing the division here. and we get 4 times a day. So way too many times. We want to make sure we support the student better. Okay, now here's a practice opportunity for you. So and sorry, it's coming up a little bit slow here, but if Serena had 10 referrals in 10 days, easy math, right? Then she's getting on average 1 referral a day. Now, 10 referrals in 15 days, averaging less than 1 a day, 0.67 a day. Now, what about 10 referrals in 5 days? You can go ahead and quickly do the math, probably do it in your head. And yes, we've got the 2 referrals per day in that instance. So that's how you're going to figure out the frequency if it isn't just kind of obviously available with the information that you have. So here's our precision problem or our precision statement. Now with all 6 components, Serena Johnson engages in harassment and inappropriate language in the hall, bus, and classroom between these time periods to get peer and adult attention 2 times per day. Okay, so now we've got all 6 of our features, and you can see how we use the ODR data. You know, this is from PBIS apps specifically in our Swiss suite. I'm sure you also have other things that you look at as well. Yeah, so that gives you a sense of how to go about doing that. Here's another practice. This one is for you to look at on your own, and it might be a little bit small. And so I'll leave it up on the screen here so you can see, but just looking at the information here, we've got Brian Bender, and you know, the dates here are December 4th through December 12th. We've got referrals by location, see classroom, referrals by problem behavior on the far right, that is inappropriate language and defiance. And then in the far left, you can see the time of day. We've got about 9 a.m. To 10:30 when that's happening most frequently. And then also in the afternoon, 12:45, it's happening until about 2 p.m. So spread across the day that way. And then the perceived motivation is actually to avoid a task and to also get peer attention. Okay, so that's, you know, we're looking at, those are the different components of the precision statement. And then you can put that all together. Brian Bender engages in inappropriate language and defiance in the classroom from 9 to 10:30 and again in the afternoon to avoid tasks and get peer attention 1.3 times per day. And so we would do the math on that to get the frequency. One thing I'll say about this, because this question came up earlier about the academics, you know, avoiding tasks. Why is the student avoiding tasks? In what classroom is the student avoiding the task? Is it a specific subject? Is it, you know, is there certain content or type of academic activity that the student is trying to get out of? So that's something to consider in a way to bring in the academic component as well. And then, you know, I know that there are some schools who actually try to use this precision statement with the academics. You can't get down to maybe the 6 components. I mean, you can do the who, you know, what the skill gaps are, which classroom it's happening in, what time period. So you can get to some of those, but it's not going to be exactly the same translation there. Okay, now this is a chance for you to think about one of your students. I'm going to give you just about 5 minutes here. You can use this as a break if you'd like as well, just a short break, or to look at one of your students and to come up with a precision statement for one of your students. So using your ODR data or other data, review referrals by a student report. Select a student who's either eligible for check and checkouts, already participating one, and look for these 6 components and then write that down, okay? I'm going to give you just 5 minutes to do that now. An example. Welcome back, everyone, from break. And for those of you who have completed the precision statement activity, feel free to throw in the Q&A maybe some challenges that you had or questions that came up, or maybe even an example and you're feeling very proud of yourself, and that's great. And we want to cheer you on in that process. Okay. And then Erica, I know we had another poll question, and I'm wondering if maybe now is anyway, if you could maybe let me know. I know I said about when we would want to do that, and I'm thinking it's coming up pretty soon, but I can't remember exactly when we said. So anyway, can look back at that and let me know maybe when is a good time for those.
There was one for slide 52, one for slide 120.
Okay, so can you tell me? I am sorry, I couldn't quite hear that.
There was one for slide 52. What percent of meeting foundations is your team already implementing?
Great.
The other, consider the tier 2 intervention plans you've seen recently. What percent had goals? I can launch either one.
Yeah, why don't we, now would be a great time to launch the first, why don't we do both of those actually, if they can be launched at the same time?
We can do one and then we can do the second one.
Okay, yeah, yeah, we can start with the first one. So this is kind of taking you all back to the meeting foundations a little bit, but here's a chance to reflect on what percentage of meeting foundations is your team already implementing, just, based on your perception. This isn't hard and fast data. One thing I'll say about this too is that we find in our research is that a lot of teams, school teams, are already doing a lot of these features, which is really exciting. So it's not uncommon for a school who's never had TIPS training to be doing between 50 to even 70% of the meeting foundation items. Part of the meeting foundations and the power of the meeting foundations is that it includes just good meeting practices, so people, which is wonderful that people are already doing some of those things. I know folks are just coming back from the break too, so might not get everyone, but yeah, so just kind of estimating, this is asking, well, when we do meet, we have maybe 40% or 20%. I know for sure we start our meetings on time and we end our meetings on time. So that's one. And we have a note taker. So we've got some roles established. So that's another one. Whereas, some people might say, well, we have all of them, except, we don't make an effort to get the meeting minutes out within the first 24 hours. And so we're just missing a couple of things. So yeah, so that's a possibility as well. Okay. Go ahead and answer the poll, just another 10 seconds here, and then we'll go ahead and close it out. Oh, we've got the last flurry here coming in. It's like, no, wait, don't close it. I want to get my 2 cents in. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and end it. And then share the results. So you can see there, yeah, we're kind of split. Some people are saying about, third almost. And yeah, that's totally to be expected. And, this is something that just by even adding a couple of those meeting foundations components, you can start improving your meeting and like the feel of those meetings already pretty quickly. Okay. Great. Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Erica. I really appreciate your help with that. I flew right by that. I was like, I think I missed a poll. So, okay. Well, let's keep on going. And then we'll do the poll. We're almost done with this section here, and then we'll do the poll after this. So thank you. Okay. So everyone got a little bit of practice with establishing your own precision statement for your students. Okay, let's keep moving then. So, the thing you can also use with PBS apps, there's check in, check out Swiss. So some schools are using that as well, but otherwise people are just using their own data systems to monitor check in, check out or your other tier 2 intervention. So this is an example for how you would look at the data with a specific intervention. So with check in, check out Swiss reports, we can look at the individual student data. There's a student's daily average points across time as compared to their goal with associated office discipline referrals. And then you also have your average points per day per period, and then average points per day for a single class period. And then you also have your school-wide data for all students participating in check in, check out. We've got the range and the mean, and that's really where we're talking about the systems level. So as someone, I think it was Michelle earlier, was talking about, which team is this? Is it student team or is this the systems team? So under that umbrella, you could be looking at both. Okay. And I see a hand raised. Maybe if you don't mind putting your question in the Q&A, that would be best. Thank you so much. Okay, now, so this is what the check in, check out report will look like for an individual student. This is the individual student count report. And, the X horizontal axis here is each school day, and the Y axis is the points earned. The dark line here is the goal line. And for us, and most often with check in, check out, it is 80% is the goal that we want the student meeting that daily goal of 80%. Each data point above the line here is green, and then data points underneath are red. Let's see here. Someone asked, how do you determine the time frame for a new student for check in, check out? At this time of year, would you look at the entire school year or only the last number of weeks? I would honestly do both. So, I think if you haven't been looking at it so far and kind of the kid has just been trucking along, which I know totally happens, I would, maybe look at it for like the first 6 weeks of enrollment. How are they doing? And then if you can look at it for the last 6 weeks, if you're kind of just getting to that point where you can progress monitor, that's great. If a student has been going at like 90% for months and months, it's time to say, hey, can we scaffold the student off? What would a lighter version of check in, check out look like? And let's make room for some other students preventatively to get them on check in, check out to support them. So it's a great question, Bridget, definitely. And this question really brings up the idea that those decision rules, having them established ahead of time are so essential. So one thing your school could do is decide, how often do we want to review a student's check in, check out data? Is it going to be once a month? Is it going to be every 6 weeks, every 8 weeks? And so that's going to be embedded. So whoever is the team facilitator and the data analyst knows, okay, it's been 8 weeks since we enrolled Erin into check in, check out. We are going to add her to our agenda automatically because we want to take a look at her data, because it's been 8 weeks, and that's what we have as our decision rule, that we check all the students' data every 2 months. So anyway, that's a way to think about that. Lana says, we have not begun this process in my particular school. However, the information I'm receiving will be helpful when we receive in-person training. Yeah, absolutely. So this will completely support the work that you're doing. And, you might be able to make some of the smaller changes, even just adopting and adapting the tips meeting minutes template can help to prompt the questions that you should be asking during that kind of precision statement process and the action planning process. So that's great. Thank you. Okay, so let's look at these data a little bit closer. So this is the report that shows the average daily percent of total points per period, along with the goal line there, that 80%. And it shows that you can see the class periods are along the bottom here, 1, 2, 3 through 6. These data show that periods 1, 2, 3, Serena is doing well overall because she's making above the goal line during those class periods. And then, but 5 and 6 are not going as well. So we know that we need to take a closer look at those 2 classes. There we go. So if we look at period 5, we know that from our precision statement before, harassment, inappropriate language was happening during these different time periods. And these data show that, Serena is at or above the goal line for 5 of the 8 school days. So we can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we've got our 3 that are below the line here. So, we're not quite where we want to be. So that's, quickly, 63% of the time she's meeting the goal, but we really want that 80% of the time. So here, when we look at period 6, we can see that there's an A here, and I know it's probably quite small on your screen, but there's an A here, and that A means absent. So the student was absent, and so we have missing data for those days. So 4 of the potential 11 days are at or above the goal line, but we're missing some information, and there may be something else going on there too. So now let's go together and pull together all that information that we looked at to write the precise statement with the data that we have from check and check out. So we still have Serena. The strengths is that she's doing well in periods 1 through 4, and she's at or above her 80% goal. So that's really important. We want to acknowledge what's going well, and we're just looking at what we can do to make improvements. We know about the what, the where, the when, and we have here that in periods 5 and 6, she's meeting the goal 63% or less. And then we have the same thing, the frequency, period 5, 63% of points per period, and period 6, 36% of the points met. So period 6 is really a struggle. So we need to figure out what's going on there. So we have talked about a really important part of the TIPS model, which is this idea that precision has 6 points. It's like playing that game clue, the who, what, when, where, why, and the frequency, which is the how often. And I've given you a sense of that you can use data to help you determine each of these 6 precision points. So we have met our module objective so far. We've identified the 6 points. We used an example from ODR data and also just an example from check and check out Swiss data as well. Okay, so when you already went through the first example, but just in interest of time, we're not going to do another one with check and check out data, especially since not everyone is quite using that. But I will say in the Q&A, if anyone wants to add in any additional points about reflections on this idea of using a precision statement process as they're developing their interventions and solution plans, I'm curious to hear that. Maybe something that's surprising, something that's making you go, and also what is challenging and what do you think might be a tough sell or is not feasible at your school. While we're doing that, I think, Erica, this is the time for that next poll.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and get that launched.
Thank you. So in this next section, we are going to go beyond the precision statement, and we're talking about the goal. So once you got your precision statement, you're going to figure out, where do we want to end up? This is where we are with a precision statement, but where do we want to end up? So in this next section, I'm asking you to think about what percentage of your intervention plans for students actually have a clear goal defined. And this is obviously just a guesstimate, but throw out your best guesstimate. Okay, just another 15 seconds to see if anyone else has an answer. Okay, I am going to end the poll. And I will say and share the results. I think your guesstimates are pretty good, y'all. And it's interesting because for me, they actually reflect some of our research that in fact, it's true that a lot of our individual student plans do not have specific goal statements included. So you're pretty accurate here in saying, yeah, it's not the more common case to have goal statements included. And, this is all about, one way you can think about this back to our mountain climbing analogy is that it's really hard to know where you're going if you don't have a goal. If you don't have the goal at the top of the mountain set, then it's really hard to stay focused on the task at hand and to build the necessary skills and supports you need in order to accomplish a goal if you don't know where you're going. So, you can think about a map, having a destination, having a goal for change allows you to know when you met that goal and then when you can think about allocating resources, like that question about how often should we be looking at check in, check out CICO data. That's all about what part of knowing when you've arrived at student success is having a goal. And that allows you to take some students or scaffold students off of tier 2 interventions so that you can make room for other students who may have other needs and more pressing needs to get in. So, all right. Thank you everyone for participating in the poll. So let's talk about the next component of the TIPS model here, which is identify a goal for change. And I am watching the time, so we'll have about 30 minutes and then we will take that 15-minute break so you all can, is this right? Am I thinking about this right? So you can all go out and see the eclipse.
I think it's about 3. I'm not sure how many people are in the path of totality, where
Okay.
I'm more about 94%. So I think
Right now?
no, about
Okay.
3:10 to 3:25-ish. Let me double check the times. But to give folks a minute, if anyone in the Q&A, we'll check the Q&A.
Oh yeah, people are saying
3:21, 3:23 for Lehigh Valley. Yeah. So maybe like 3:14, 3:15
okay, great.
break, and then come back maybe a little bit closer to 3:30.
Okay, perfect.
We're a long state.
What's that?
We're like a long, have long state across the
Yes.
path. So
Yeah, absolutely.
um,
Okay, yeah, I see Jennifer 3:21, 3:23. Someone asked if the break is going to push back the end time. It is not. We are going to stick with the same end time. So yeah, we had already planned to have basically about 2 15-minute breaks. So we're just making sure that we break at the peak then. So, okay, perfect. I'm so excited for you all. Okay. We're earlier than you all. So I already went out and took a quick peek with my glasses and it's just like a little bite was taken out of the sun right now. So nothing too major over here. All right, so let's jump in to determine if a goal, what a goal statement is comprised of. First of all, it has 3 different elements. It's aligned with the precise statement, precision statement, and it's also SMART. And I know many of you have been in education for a long time and you know what a SMART goal is. It's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So we'll go over that kind of quickly since that's quite pervasive in our field. Thanks, Christina in Pittsburgh, 3:17. So great. We will be breaking at about 3:15. So we will get you out there. Awesome. Okay, so again, we are still in that effective problem solving area of our TIPS model. If you look at the light bulb, We are at, where's my cursor? We are at this more turquoise bubble here, identify goal for change. So we're still pretty early on in the process. You can understand why this is a full day training. Okay, so our big ideas for this section are that you need goals. You need goals to identify if you're changing, if you're measuring change. Goals have 3 elements, and it's what are we going to change, by how much, and by when. So that time piece is really important. We want the goals to be aligned with the precision statement, and we want them to pass that SMART check. As you may have suspected, this is also aligned with our TIPS fidelity checklist. So we have item 16 here, where it says student plans have at least one goal defined, and then it's got the 3 components there, the what, by how much, and by when, that you can check off. So, you get a 1 on the TIPS fidelity checklist if you have some problems that have solutions defined, have a goal defined, and a 2 if all your student plans have goals defined. And I will say, like I mentioned in our research, that this is even teams that have been trained on TIPS and received the full meal deal training and coaching support. This is one that we're seeing people are still struggling to include. They get better at it, but it's still a tough one. So that's why I wanted to include it here, because I just think it's helpful to keep in mind as you're thinking about your tier 2 and think about those tiered decision guidelines, because those goals, at least the time frame goals, can be embedded with your tiered decision guidelines. So goals are just required to measure change, because it's hard for us to know if things are getting better, worse, or staying the same if we don't have a goal in mind. So, when you determine that a student is having a challenge, or a classroom or a grade level is having a challenge, that tells us that whatever is happening in that situation is not working. And so we have to ask ourselves, what would it look like for me to say if this plan is working, that there's not a problem, and that the student is being successful in this environment. And identifying those pieces will allow us to come to that goal. So having a goal allows us to prevent problem admiration. I don't know if you've ever been in a meeting, basically where, there's a lot of venting maybe that happens and we never arrive at that solution. So this way we can avoid that altogether. We can state what the problem is, but then we can quickly identify where do we want to be instead of where we are right now. It facilitates that discussion around that solution creation. It establishes a way for us to monitor progress, and it establishes a way for us to measure implementation fidelity, and as well, motivation. Motivation is a part of this for all of us, for the teachers involved, for the team members, and for the students. We feel good when we're getting closer to our goals. And I know, if any of you have tried to run a 5K or a marathon, having that defined distance goal or a time goal is really important to help keep our spirits and our motivation going. Okay, so let's talk about those 3 elements. It's all very easy to understand, but it gets a little bit more difficult in application. So our 3 elements include what will change, by how much, and by when. So we'll look at some examples here together. So first up, we've got this idea of exercising, right? Exercising, being healthier. So my goal is to exercise more. Is that a precise goal statement? No, it's not. So we can layer onto it with our 3 features. So I want to exercise 3 times a week. I want to exercise 3 times a week for the month of March. I want to exercise for 30 minutes. How much? How often and when? So 30 minutes, 3 times a week for the month of March. So there we have our 3 features of the goal setting component. I want to be more positive when I'm working with students. I'm going to increase positive interactions. That's my goal. Well, okay, but we need a little bit more information. Increase positive interactions during the 5th period. Okay, that gets us at 2. Provide 5 positive comments to every corrective comment during the first 5 minutes of 5th period. So that gets us to all 3 of those features. And then when we are, maybe the goal is using reading to learn. So in 7th grade math materials, we're going to read 7th grade math materials. Well, that's not very specific. How about reading 7th grade math story problems? Well, it's a little bit more specific. How about read and complete grade 7 math story problems with 80% accuracy 4 of 5 days by April 15th. So you can see how your action plan, your solutions will really change with the addition of a goal and the 3 components of these goals. Okay, so let's go ahead and again, look at those 3 features, what, by when, and by how much. We start with the current level of the student progress, and then we'll determine what will change by how much and by when. So the current here is an average of 40% of points. And we have it's earned daily during July, and there's a range there of 20 to 60% is where the student's at for check and check out. So our goal then, though, is to get an average of 70% of points earned daily by March 31st. So we're giving ourselves a runway. The student's currently at 40%, with the upper part being 60%. So setting a goal of 80% might be too high to start out with, so we can lower it and say, okay, let's try to get to 70% and by March. So that's how you want to think. And as we get to the SMART goals, that's also realistic, the R of the SMART step. Here's another one. The current status is that the student is getting an average of 70 points earned in December. And then the goal is an average of 80 points earned daily by the end of January. So our goal isn't so far, we don't have to go as further. So the time span, we've given ourselves a more narrow time span there. And then here's our last example. 61% of students in check and check out are meeting their goals. But, as a tier 2 system, we really want to have 80% of our students meeting their check and check out goals by April 15th. So you can make these kind of goal setting statements at the individual student level, but also at the systems level. Okay, so let's go through these and look to see if it's got the 3 features of a goal or not. So I'm going to give you just a minute or so, a couple minutes to look through each one of these and see if you can find the three elements of a goal statement. Okay, let's take a look at these together. So the first one, meet daily goal of 80% of points for 8 out of 10 school days by April 15th. Goal or no goal? Goal, yes. Meet daily goal of 80%, going down now, meet goal of 80% of points earned, currently at 61% for 8 of school days. Not a goal because we don't have the by when. Now up to the top of the next column, meet daily goal, currently at 61% for 8 out of 10 school days. It's not a goal because we're missing our by when and our by how much. Next one, get 100% of points daily for the remainder of the school year. This is a goal, but the question comes up, is it realistic? That's an important part of our goal setting as well. And because no one likes it when you set a goal that you can't make, then that's a real motivation downer. The last one here, average points per day at 80% or better, 80% of the time, which is 4 out of 5 days through the end of the school year. So that is a goal. Give yourself a pat on the back if you got those correct. Okay, so we just have about 10 minutes before we go ahead and take our break. So we'll just talk about our final big idea here, and that's the second to last big idea here is that the goals need to be aligned to the precision statement. So these are some common errors that we've seen, and you might be able to relate to these, but a lot of times out there we'll see that the change in the goal does not actually fit that precision statement element that we originally developed. The precision statements defined aggression in the hall after lunch, but then the goal is defined at decreasing defiance. So there's that mismatch of what the challenging behavior is, and what the location is in this example. Measure defined in the goal does not fit the measure used in the precision statement. So if we're using points per day, we want to use points per day, and not a different status, a different metric. And that last one, the goal is not achievable in a timely fashion. And we talked about this just not being realistic. Maybe there's too many things to learn. We've got at the second bullet there, a gap between the current frequency and the goal is just too big. It's a bit too big of a mountain to climb. Or calendar doesn't allow that to happen, or staff time. Like it's not realistic for me to meet with the parents and the student before we start this intervention. So I just can't start it on Monday. We have to have it start on Wednesday, whatever the case is. So we want to keep those in mind. So let's work through these two examples together, and determine if they're aligned with the precision statement. So here's our precision statement: harassment and inappropriate language in the hall, bus, and class between 9:15 and 10 and 12 through 12:45 to get peer and adult attention 2 times a day. Now let's look at our goal statement. So we have Serena's frequency of problem behavior between 2 and 3:15 in the bus, hall, classroom, common, cafe to obtain peer attention will decrease from 0.81 a day to 0.4 a day by October 31st. Is this aligned or not aligned? I'm going to say not aligned. We're missing some of the placement. The bus, hall, classroom is there, but then it says the commons and the cafe, and that's not quite true. Peer attention is identified in the goal statement, but not adult attention. So there's a bit of a mismatch there, and then the time period is off too. So this is a not aligned goal statement. Let's look at one more. We've got the same precision statement, but our goal statement here is Serena's frequency of harassment and inappropriate language in the hall, bus, and class between the times, and they match the one above, to get peer and adult attention will decrease from 2.02 times per day, which is what the precision statement says, to 0.2 a day by October 31st. So aligned or not aligned? Yes, this is aligned. So you can see that it matches up on all of those features. Okay, here is another one for you to take a look at. I'll have you just read that and see what you think. Okay, so we've got the correct behaviors listed there. The times aren't quite right. The motivation is listed up here, attention only. So this one, if you put not aligned, you got it correct. Okay, so here is our last big idea, and then we will take a break. This one's really quick because it's all about SMART goals, and I'm sure you all have all been trained on SMART goals before: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. I'm going to move through this one a little bit quickly since we're going to go on break in just 2 minutes. So, you know, here we have this cute puppy who's going in the bathroom and chewing up and tearing up the toilet paper. So, you know, is the puppy the problem? No, the puppy is not the problem. The problem is that we are leaving the door open to the bathroom and giving the puppy access to the toilet paper. So, you know, we want to go ahead and use a SMART check for that. You know, typical goal: puppy chews on toys only. You know, otherwise we want the puppy, you know, the puppy is chewing on the toilet paper anytime the bathroom door is left open, and we are trying to avoid that. So the goal is to close the door so the puppy chews on toys only when the bathroom door is closed. So it's just thinking about your environment. The context really matters here. So that's an essential part of this goal setting is thinking about the context. Okay, with that, I'm going to say this is probably a good spot to go ahead and pause to give everyone that 15-minute break so that you can go ahead and enjoy the natural show outside. Go ahead. Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome back from the break. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you once more. And if anyone... Yeah, feel free to throw in the Q&A if make sure you all had a good experience, that you had a good experience at the break here. Okay, I'm going to share and let's see if I can get my presentation back up. It's thinking about it. Just give me a second here. So we're going to move forward in the slides just a little bit. If you're following along, just going to wrap up the goal section. Oh gosh, someone had cloud coverage. I know that was a problem people were worried about. I'm going to stop share because it's not quite working for me. Hold on here. Right, and oddly, in Oregon, we actually have clear skies, which is not typical. So it's like when we don't really have the eclipse, we have clear skies, but okay, so let me just try this again. Sorry, y'all, it's being a little finicky. And I'm realizing you're just seeing PowerPoint, you're not actually seeing the presentation slide, and unfortunately it doesn't seem to be working. The computer, I think, is deciding it doesn't like this. So let's see here. Mary says we saw it for about a minute before the clouds came in. Perfect. Well, I'm glad you at least caught a little glimpse of it. And for those of you who missed it because of clouds, when we're done, you can pop back out and you'll at least still get to see some of the eclipse. I'm sure it'll still be a partial. You know, I'm so sorry. It looks like my, I'm gonna stop share again. It looks like my PowerPoint is getting a little bit frozen. So let me work on that real quick. I'm gonna close it out and open it back up. So just as we're, you know, moving out of the goal setting process, Now we're moving into the final step here. And we're looking at the solutions. And this is where I'll talk a little bit more about check and check out, actually. So for those of you who aren't implementing it, okay, I think we're back in business. Okay, great. And oh gosh, we're at the very beginning. So let me just fast forward here back to our goal setting section. And we're just going to wrap that up and then we're going to move into the solutions area. Okay, so the goal setting piece that we just talked about, we went through these big ideas. Goals are necessary to measure change. They've got these three elements and they really need to be aligned with the precision statement. And then you need to go through that SMART check. That SMART check we went over pretty quickly. It's something that's widely talked about in education. But the first step, quite honestly, is just to get those goals on the page. So that would be the first thing. And then over time, if you can add in these other pieces about it being specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely, then that's awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into our identify solutions. Really, this is where the intervention planning takes place. And here we're going to be focused on identifying if your solution has contextual fit and it has contextual fit with the action plan for the specific student of concern. And if you can discriminate if your solution is aligned with the elements of your precision statement and if modifications are needed. I think a common perception about tier 2 intervention is that there's no adaptations because that's when you start doing adaptations, then you're moving into tier 3. So something that we'll talk about briefly in this module is that, in fact, tier 2 interventions, it is allowable to have some adaptations. So our big ideas for this module, we're going to identify solutions that match the function of the behavior and identify solutions that have contextual fit. So those pieces are really important. And that, specifically with check and check out, there are a number of strategies that go into an overarching intervention. And these pieces are strategies that focus on prevention, on teaching, on acknowledgement, on correction, and on extinguishing the challenging behavior within this contextual fit. Okay. Similarly, it's important to think about the different roles that we talked about at the beginning and, whose job is it in order to make sure that our interventions and solutions are aligned with the student, with the function of the behavior. And the nice thing about the TIPS model is that it actually falls to multiple people within the team. So you'll think about, for example, the data analyst knows the data and has already been thinking about what the function of the behavior is. Maybe someone on the team is a classroom teacher, and so they know. And so they're making sure that that solution and intervention is aligned with what the students' biggest challenges are. So it's not just left to one person to figure this out. And then it's also, you've got the meeting minute person taking the meeting minutes, and their role is to really make sure that the team follows through with all the steps. If the team is moving on to the next action plan and we don't have a goal statement down, for example, it's up to that minute taker to say, oh, hold on team, I still need a goal statement for that student that we are wrapping up with. And so going in and filling that information in. And then this piece about small adaptations might be needed. So again, we're focused on check and check out. I'm going to talk a little bit about check and check out as an intervention. For those of you who haven't heard of it, you should know that it's an evidence-based intervention. There's actually been a lot of studies done on it. There's a larger, big national study, I think, being done out of Missouri right now on check and check out. And the nice thing about it is that it's the same or very similar for all participants with just minor adaptations. And it includes instruction for the students and includes positive adult attention, and is really focused on this idea of self-regulation. So becoming a self-manager and being able to follow these, getting a lot of reinforcement throughout the day to follow these check-in, check-out procedures. Teams, each one of your teams is going to determine what is the best eligibility guideline for your school, for your students. So here are some examples of ones that schools use. You want to make sure, of course, that, it's a good fit for the students, thinking about that function, the behavior. If the student is avoiding adult attention, check in, check out is probably not the best intervention for that student. If the student needs some minor adaptations, that's great. We talked earlier about the student not being in a crisis situation. Check in, check out is not meant for crisis situations. It's meant for more low-level functions and behavior. Okay, and then we also have a plan for implementation fidelity, which is a great thing about check in, check out. So we're still here in this problem-solving section of our TIPS model. And we're now in the green bubble here, identify solution and implementation plan. And on our fidelity checklist, we've got a spot here that correlates to this as well. Item 14 is all students receiving tier 2 support have documented solutions. And then this suggests that you look at 3 different students to determine that. And then item 15 is a full action plan is documented for at least one documented solution/intervention for one student plan. And that will always include who will do what and by when. So an action plan isn't just student is enrolled for check in, check out, but the action plan includes, okay, who's communicating to the parents about this, who's communicating to the classroom teachers, who's communicating with the student, making sure the student understands what's happening, all of those pieces. So it's all the who will do what by when. All right, so let's talk about these eligibility guidelines. As I mentioned, you'll have to determine what the eligibility, and this is for any tier 2 intervention, right? We're using check in and check out as an example. But a student who was in tier 2 interventions previously at their previous school, maybe you have an office discipline referral criteria, maybe an absence criteria. As I mentioned, not in a crisis. Maybe that student has a 504 plan, and maybe there's just, a request from a student that they need a little bit more attention. They're having a hard time at home, whatever the case is. A teacher or family member comes forward and says, my student could really use a little bit more support. So this flow chart gives you an example of what kind of the anatomy of check in, check out. And it starts at the top with that blue bubble, student recommended for check in, check out. And then the check in, check out is implemented. And then you can see the orange circles there, the yellowish marigold colored circles there, that it starts with a morning check-in. And that is facilitated by the check in, check out coordinator. And they are the ones that are keeping an eye on the data. And often they're the facilitator of a classroom where the check in, check out occurs in the morning, but that's not always the case. After the morning check-in, students have regular check-ins with their teachers. If they're in one classroom with one teacher, then it's usually just that one classroom teacher meeting with the student briefly throughout the day, giving them feedback on their goals and on their point card. And then there's an afternoon checkout that's usually back at a central classroom or with a specified person who's usually not the main classroom teacher. And then there's a home component where the parent or a caregiver is providing feedback. So, and that happens every day. Then on the right side, you can see there we've got our check-in, check-out coordinator is summarizing our data. And then we've got our tier 2 meeting that's reviewing those data. And then as needed, they're revising the plan for that student or exiting the student from check-in, check-out. So that gives you kind of a global view of what that looks like. This is kind of a snapshot, a very basic picture of what the point card is what we call it most often, what the point card looks like. So you can see we've got different periods highlighted here. We've got the morning check-in, before recess, before lunch, after recess, and then the afternoon checkout. And our 3 goals for this student are they safe? Are they responsible? Are they respectful? And the teacher or the morning or afternoon checkout person will talk to the student and say, oh, thanks for being safe, responsible, respectful in this class. I'm going to give you 2s across the board here. Or, next time, let's make a better choice in following those directions when we were, walking to the cafeteria. So I'm going to give you a 1 for partial safety, partial respectfulness. So it's a chance to give the student props, but then also to give the student a chance for feedback. And some bigger reinforcements are accumulated down the line at the end of each week and when they're meeting their goals. As I mentioned, and that we've got that happening there. And then we've also got a home component to it. And this is a very simple home report. Each school develops their own. There's various versions available. But a home report might mean that the student simply has I met my goal today. I had a hard day. One thing I did really well today was something I'm going to work on tomorrow is, and then any comments from the check-in check-out coordinator or classroom there. And that's happening in the afternoon. So that just gives you a quick snapshot of that intervention. Okay. So the first big idea is that the solution actions should have contextual fit and an action plan. So this is making sure that, your check-in, check-out program, everything is established and available for use. And earlier, when I spoke about the implementation stages, this is something that this first bullet is really what should be established as you're preparing to install or implement any new intervention. We have our plan, we know who's available to do what. Maybe we have a little manual or a decision flow chart that helps out everyone in the building to make sure that we're doing the plan as we said we would. Also, in the case of check-in, check-out, it includes teaching students, staff, and families what the routines are. Minor adaptations are allowable. We'll talk about that. There is a component where students in the check-in, check-out classroom can earn maybe meaningful activities or preferred items. And then the action plan is also going to define that who's doing what by when. So these solution elements along the left-hand side here, you can take a look at these, and these should be a part of many of your interventions. So not just check-in, check-out, but we've got this prevention component, a teaching component, an acknowledgement component, extinguishing or terminating the undesired behavior, correcting, recorrecting, and safety for all. So I know we're getting a little bit close to time here, so I'm not going to go through this completely, but it's important for you as you're developing your interventions to consider these different features of a solution. Are our solutions only focused on one of these strategies, then it might be a less effective intervention. If we can have an intervention that focuses on prevention, on teaching, on acknowledging, on making the new behaviors more desirable than the old, less desirable behaviors, then that's, great. So think about all of these features as you're developing your solution plans. We have this contextual fit, this kind of just brief assessment questions that you can ask as you're looking to understand if check-in, check-out is a good intervention for your team. So is there a safety concern? If there is a safety concern, check-in, check-out is probably not the right intervention. Will check-in, check-out implementation be enough support to help the student increase the use of the desired behavior? If the answer is no, they're going to need some other pieces or the adaptations are really big, then it might not be a good match. The third question, does the student have the skills? So is it even feasible for us to have this expectation of the student that they can do these expected behaviors? So yes, and then does the student use that skill at the right time and place? And then yes, will it take for the student to maintain that skill fluency? So check in, check out could be a great option there. Does the student like attention, adult attention? If the answer is yes, then check in, check out is great for those students. If the answer is no, then you might need some other intervention. Will basic check in, check out work without adaptations? No. Well, then we need to ask what adaptations are needed, and hopefully they're not too intensive or too specialized. And then do the number and specificity of adaptations warrant an individualized support plan? So if they do, then it's probably not the best. Okay, so we're going to go through this check for understanding pretty quickly here. And we're basically asking, does this sound aligned or not aligned? So I'll do the first one here. We're doing our solution planning, and it occurs with a precision statement that has 4 precision points. This might be a trick question. Is it aligned or not aligned? It is not aligned because we only have 4 precision points. We have 6 precision points, as you might remember from our earlier section. A precise problem statement defines why to avoid adult attention, and the defined check in, check out, check in routine requires a close proximity to an adult and an unknown length of time. Would you say that this is an aligned solution for the student or not aligned? Not aligned. Now, this next one, the precise problem statement defines why to get adult attention, and the defined check in, check out routine requires close proximity. Is this aligned or not aligned? Yes, it's aligned. So that's great. The student likes getting positive praise from adults, then sweet, we've got a good intervention for them. Now, this last one, the precision statement defines that the student wants to avoid adult attention as a motivator, and the defined check in, check out routine is adapted to have text messages during the day and the same person for an arrival and dismissal checkout. Is this aligned or not aligned? This is definitely more aligned. So this is an example of some adaptations we can make that are not really, too big, and in that way are, totally within the parameters of what is a tier 2 intervention. Okay. So here's an example. Again, we're going back to our Serena example. We go through these questions. Is there a safety concern? No. Can check in, check out provide enough support for our student? Yeah, we think so. Does the student have the skills? Yes, she can definitely be taught the skills. Does the student like peer attention? Well, yeah, look at our motivation here and it used to be peer attention and adult attention. So does the student like adult attention? Yes, it's probably not a bad thing. So if they're going after the adult attention or peer attention, it's not 100%, but that's something we can look at. And then 5 are minor adaptations to check in, check out needed. Not really. So, okay. Again, this back to this idea of adaptations. Big idea number 3. In tier 2, it's okay to have adaptations if it's easy to implement. And one kind of general rule is that it requires fewer than 3 adaptations. The main thing you're thinking about are resources and how many resources are we expending to support the student. And that'll kind of give you an idea of whether you're moving outside of those reasonable expectations. Okay, let's see here. I'm going to move forward. We're going to look at some acceptable adaptations to check in, check out. Different types of visual prompts and reminders are completely within reason. Maybe there's different check-ins with a student or a teacher, or it's not every single period, it's every other class period. So those are some other additions. And then if there is a student, maybe an older student that they prefer peer attention but not adult attention, you can have that as a possibility as well. Here are some examples of individualizing the school-wide expectations. So, our broad expectations are safety, organization, achievement, and respect, but then they write in here for the individual student, you're keeping your hands to yourself, you have your homework ready, you took notes during class, and you raise your hand to talk. Those are this student's individualized goals. Okay, and so you can see how that comes up. So here on this slide, basically there's just some suggested, if you feel like your school needs some adaptations for check-in, check-out, there's some examples here. Depending on the age of the students, I'll jump down to number 3 here. Maybe you're not using numbers, maybe you've got words, maybe you've got smiley faces, maybe there's, something different there. The report home, maybe there's not an available family member to be that positive feedback in the after school. So perhaps there's a staff member that can do that. So there's lots of different ways that you can adapt it without changing things too much. And let's see here. We have this, how do the TIPS guidelines vary for academic meetings in comparison to behavior meetings? Do you have any resources to use for academic meetings? We do have some as a part of the full TIPS training. There are some examples. And actually, Dr. Shonda Tilleen led the effort to help us come up with some additional examples at other grade levels and with academics. So I will say that is a part of the full training. There's nothing online right now that we have that's readily available that talks about this for academics. So if that's something you want to reach out to me and discuss more, we can definitely do that. We just have about 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to do this last check for understanding, and then we'll just wrap things up. So true or false, I jumped ahead already. True or false, check-in, check-out procedures are mandated to be the same for everyone? No, this is false. Minor adaptations are available. If minor adaptations are required, there are 3 or fewer. True or false? True. Ideally, you don't want to make too many adaptations. Extra check-in periods can be added and entered into check-in, check-outs. Plus, I didn't really cover this one. This is about our platform specifically, so we'll skip over that one. So one thing to keep in mind with all of this is that, we're talking about tier 2 specifically, and it's possible that they might need more support than what tier 2 can offer. And so if that's the case, you're really looking at an individual student support plan. And, if the tier 2 isn't quite right, then you have to look at what is available in tier 3. And so that's where you have your decision rules that are going to help you make those decisions. So yeah, with that, we've made it through our 3 modules, being able to identify if your solution has contextual fit. You've got some good questions to ask as you're looking at your own interventions. And then this idea of looking at alignment, if your interventions and solutions are aligned with that precision statement, thinking about the function of the behavior. So that's towards the end there. We were going to go over a video, but I would suggest you watch these videos. They're great little videos that we have on that pbis.org website. You can practice along with the TIPS Fidelity checklist watching that. You can watch it with your team. So there's a lot of options for, even if you're not going through the full TIPS training that we offer at the University of Oregon, then you can go ahead and watch those videos and actually make really great progress with the resources we have on the website. I do want to say thank you, everyone. It's been such a joy to be with you today. Don't forget about that discount code. And then this is my email address. I see someone has added there. I'm not sure if I'll be able to grab your email address from there. So if you don't mind emailing me at echapar@uoregon.edu, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And then folks can also take a look at that mtssolutions.com, and I'll be updating more information there soon. So Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. I'm going to stop my screen share, and I know that we have someone from Patton coming on to share some wrap-up notes.
Erin, thank you so much. This has been a fabulous session. We love how you integrated all of the support.